but never Officer Lovebug. Yeah,
Officer Herbie.
yeah, that works. Yeah,
I like that.
yeah. Believe it or not, I've also been called some more negative things too. But
What?
Shocking.
The
Examples?
Yeah. Don't know if I want to go there. Yeah, we're in a sensitive era.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
Yeah.
Hey, great to have you on the show here today. I think we can kind of, break this up into maybe two parts, and we can talk police stuff, and we can talk about all the stuff that your department does in particular, because I think that's really cool that you're more than just a police officer. You're also a firefighter and also an EMT. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Do I have my facts right over here?
Yes, sir.
And then in addition to that, we just talk straight up training, straight up lifting. Let's kind of start out with some lifting. Start off with some more lighthearted stuff. Start off with some more fun stuff, and let's, I guess, bring people up to speed on like where you're at now. So we're here today with Andrew Herbert, who has done a 942-pound squat in knee wraps. I think you've pulled around 800 pounds before, right?
Yeah, 860. So yeah, my best.
860.
Yeah, my best was at and actually you made a great joke when I did it. It was at Slingshot Record Breakers the year before this last one, and I was similarly jacked.
860, by the way.
Yeah, or 859 point blah 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 because of the
Gotcha.
kilo conversions. But no, you said, because I had baby powder all over my thighs, and I get up to the bar, and it's on YouTube. You're like, you can't even tell he has baby powder on because he's so pale. Yeah, and so yeah, I took that to heart, and I started tanning. But no.
You got some tanning bulbs at your house?
Oh yeah.
Damn. So how I guess kind of walk us through, how did you build up to such a big squat? I know that you train with Dan Green and you have a great mentor and stuff. But where did you start in powerlifting? What did you, in your first contest, approximately how much did you squat?
So yeah, my very first meet, it was I squatted, I think it was 535 or 540, somewhere around that, as far as the pounds. And then bench was, I only made my opener. I made roughly 365. I failed on, I tried 385 and I failed on those in my second and third. And then deadlift, I went 3 for 3, and it was like 635 or 640.
Were you much lighter?
A fair amount, yeah. So my first meet, I competed at 220. My first 3 meets actually were at 220, but the very first one, I barely even cut weight. I think I didn't even really, I don't know if I knew about the potential to weigh in 24 hours ahead of time. Cause like, I came up wrestling, and so like we always weighed in just right before we competed, or an hour before. So, also it was in Vacaville, and it's like a hour and a half drive, and I just didn't really feel like doing it, so I skipped breakfast. I drove up and made 220 and, competed. But so deadlift, interestingly, had been my best lift beforehand. And a lot of wrestlers, come up with a really strong back, good grip, good back. And so that was my best. Squat was comparatively my worst. But then, especially under like Dan Green's guidance, the technique for the squat came along, as well as working on my weaknesses, and it ended up surpassing everything else.
What's something that gave you confidence to lift those kind of weights? Was it seeing someone like Dan Green up close and seeing him, that work ethic maybe every day?
Yes.
Giving you some confidence? Because you already have a good work ethic because of your wrestling background and sports background.
Yeah, it was I think a lot of it's sort of channeling that work ethic in the right directions. And Dan also, did other sports before he got into lifting, and so I think he channeled that.
Cheerleading.
He did, yeah.
You hear that, boys and girls? You want to be jacked? Start out as a cheerleader or a soccer player.
Yeah. There's a lot of good things to do. And so watching him, especially watching anything in person is different than, because I had watched plenty of big lifts on YouTube or videos and stuff like that, but in person is just different. And that, I think that definitely set a good impression for me. At all the meets I went to, I would watch big lifts. Like one that I always remembered was David Douglas. David the Beast Douglas. I love that guy, and he's the first person I ever saw squat 903, so over 900.
Huge bencher too.
Oh,
that
bench is insane. Yeah,
absolute animal.
Oh, dude, yeah, he's phenomenal. So I still remember watching him. He was the first guy who I saw squat over 900 in reps. He's also the first person I saw tear his bicep deadlifting. It might have been the same meet, yeah. Or
That's not good. Seeing people tear stuff up close and you see it roll up or hear it sometimes, you're just like, oh,
yeah.
why'd I have to be there for that? Leaves a scar in your brain forever.
Oh, totally, yeah. But it helped me learn what happens in the sport. And then Derek Kendall, I saw he was the first person I saw squat over 900. I think it was 909 in sleeves. And I was like, what in the world is this? So just seeing other people do it, it's like the 4-minute mile. You know what I mean? People, before it happened, people thought no one can do that. But then they saw someone do it, and all of a sudden more people did it. So that's part of it. And also just the way I kind of live my life is like, if I want to do something, maybe it's impossible, maybe it's dangerous, but you don't know until you try it.
Derek Kendall, by the way, did an 881-pound front squat.
Oh yeah, that. His front squat is gnarly. I think that's got to be the heaviest front squat. I know Jezza does some crazy front squats too, but Derek Kendall, I mean, if you look at
it's just no disrespect to anybody that currently has the all-time world record, but I mean, like this guy, I mean, if he got hurt, and he got banged up a little bit, so he didn't end up actually doing it. But I just have never seen anybody with that kind of squatting power before.
Oh,
not raw, it was crazy.
Derek was on another level, and then you throw in the other thing, his shoulder press, his bench press. I've watched him bench press. I think he got dinged for it on maybe downward movement, but 628, like. Yeah, it was just ridiculous. He, and he does bodybuilding now. It's crazy. Yeah. Oh, it's crazy. He got
his guy's massive.
Yeah.
He's not doesn't have body fat on him to begin with. So.
Right. Yeah. He got shredded. But it's funny. He's like he stays off social media. He would. He's a monster. Like if he was on, I'm sure he'd have a crazy following. But I think he's more of like a quiet guy. He was a school teacher.
I remember him and Eric Spoto having like conversation about like negative comments on social media. I was like, this is so funny. These guys are both so huge and they're both so sensitive.
Oh,
they were so sad. Eric's like, people keep calling me fat. And Eric's like, I get the same thing too, man. He's like, I've been eating pretty good too. I don't know what the problem is. I was like, oh my God. These guys have got like 23-inch arms, 24-inch arms.
Yeah.
So you're like, I can't believe.
And that's got to be maybe 5 years ago. Imagine if they were on today.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the trolling has like exponentially
It's next
increased. Level. Yeah. Jedi trolling.
So you started out playing sports. Were you a smaller guy? Were you skinny and you had to work on getting bigger, or you always been kind of thick?
I've always been kind of thick, especially with 2 C's. And I mean, I think like looking at my dad, it's funny, like just a lot of people, I've had people know me for a long time and then they meet my dad and then they say, oh, that explains it. So my dad has a big frame. He was never into lifting. That's the thing is like, I think if he had lifted, he would be bigger and more muscular. He always
built like Ram Man from He-Man. If you can pull up Ram Man from He-Man, you basically just don't take any offense to this, but you look like a trash can.
There we go. Yeah.
SpongeBob SquarePants.
That's it's not the first time I've been called trashy.
It's good for powerlifting, though.
But no, I mean I think my genetics were good for it. I'd always been one of the stronger kids in my class growing up, and so I think it just kind of honed that and channeled it into training, and I've always just loved it too. So you never know. It's like a chicken and egg thing. Like, is it the fact that I loved to lift from an early age that helped me get stronger, or was the fact that I was stronger that made me love?
That's Ram Man right there. Bro.
I'm getting nostalgic.
All you have to do is put that shit on, man. And
Look
that's
how
you.
strong he is.
Well, he looks kind of like the Juggernaut too.
Yeah, right.
Just
right.
different color armor. Yeah,
dude,
Bro, you got to do that for Halloween.
That's your Halloween costume.
Yeah, I've done Bane. I've done the Incredible Hulk.
I think that would protect you from COVID as well.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
All that armor.
No doubt. Yeah.
Look up Ram Man if you're just only listening to the audio of this.
Oh, look at that.
Oh,
Hey, there's that grappler.
Let's chat a little bit about your wrestling background because I find that to be super fascinating. So give us some background story on kind of where that started, how it started, and kind of what it evolved into.
So I think I had from a pretty young age been very interested, and I talked about this in an earlier thing about every kid gets into like fights on the schoolyard or things like that, and you get picked on. And I can't say I was bullied more than most people. I think I was bullied less probably than most people. And part of that was probably because I was stronger than most people. But there's always that kid who's 2 or 3 years older, you know. And so it's like at that age, you know, they're gonna be bigger and stronger and tougher and all that. And so I always just hated the feeling of someone being able to physically control me. Like it's just that just eats away at my soul. And so I kind of vowed from a young age to like minimize the possibility of that ever happening. And so that motivated me to lift. That also motivated me to get into wrestling. I got into wrestling a little bit later because just the area I'm from, it's not a big sport at all. Now my dad, who's from North Carolina, he wrestled in high school. And so even from a young age, I loved just wrestling with him on like the floor, you know, and he'd teach me some base, taught me a cradle and like a half Nelson and stuff like that. And, but it wasn't until high school that I started actually competitively wrestling. And I remember a big kind of epiphany was I'd always been one of the, if not the strongest kid in my class. But I remember wrestling with a couple folks who both on appearance and, you know, strength-wise, pure like weight strength-wise, I was stronger than. But they crushed me on a wrestling mat. And so it taught me the importance of, you know, technique and, you know, wrestling specific strength, which is different than weight room strength. And so, but again, that was that feeling of getting physically controlled, physically dominated by another person, which I did not like. And so that was very motivating. And so I knew then that I wanted to keep wrestling. I didn't want to just make it a high school thing. And so I kind of went all in, spent all summers at wrestling camps, training, off-season stuff. I kind of dropped all the other sports. You know, I used to play soccer, basketball, lacrosse. I dropped all that. And, you know, and then I went to a college that I was able to wrestle at. You know, it was a Division I college. It wasn't, you know, wasn't like University of Iowa or Oklahoma State or anything.
Did you get recruited?
Yeah. So I knew I wanted to wrestle in college. So when I was visiting colleges, I specifically, you know, met with the coach, talked to the coach. Some of them would fly me out to visit, and I didn't want to chance it. I wanted to know, okay, I'm going to be able to be on the team. And so the first school I went to, which was Bucknell University in Pennsylvania, the coach there said, yeah, you know, I've got a place on the team for you. You'll be able to be in. And, you know, that first year, the freshman year, I mean, even I was, you know, maybe medium tier coming out of high school, and even like the best guys, you know, multiple time state champs, you get your ass kicked freshman year. I mean, it's a meat grinder. And
Is Bucknell, is that a Ivy League school?
No, it's close though. It's in the Patriot League.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's out there. You know, it's with like Colgate.
You got to be pretty
Townsend.
smart to go there. Was my point. From what I recall.
You know, maybe in some areas, but and so no, it was a good school, and I enjoyed it. I wrestled there for 2 years. They cut the wrestling program though. That was the problem, which has affected a lot of college programs over the years. So that's what led me to transfer and led me into going to Duke from there. So
Oh, snap.
yeah, so I went to Duke. I did redshirted and did 2 more years at Duke, and ended up graduating from there.
Well, what happens after that with wrestling? Because I feel like with college, like if you wrestle in college and you finish up, like there's not really much other than trying to maybe go real big Olympics or coaching.
Yeah, no. So it's one of my favorite sayings lately is, quote unquote, there's levels to this shit. You know, and wrestling, just like any sport, is so exemplary of that. Where, you know, you take high school, and you know, there's the guys who are on the team but never really start. You know, and then they're getting their butt kicked by the guys who are starting. But those guys aren't even really getting winning records, and they're getting their butt kicked by the guys with winning records. And those guys are getting their butt kicked by the guys who are going to the state tournament, and they're getting their butt kicked by the guys who are placing or winning the state tournament. And it keeps going, and then those guys go to college, and they all get their butt kicked. And then, you know, and then in college the levels continue, where it's like most guys never start, never really get much mat time. And they're getting their ass kicked by the starters and whatnot. And then the starters are getting their ass kicked by the national qualifiers who are getting their ass kicked by the All-Americans. And so it's just all these different levels that the general public has no conception for. You know what I mean? They just think like, oh, you know, it's the same thing as if you're watching like the Super Bowl with your buddies, and maybe they played JV high school football, and they're yelling at the screen at the best football players on the planet who would absolutely annihilate them.
That guy's not even that big.
Yeah.
You don't realize he's 6'5".
Yeah. Oh, he's slow. You know, the quarterback's got to get out of the pocket. You know what I mean? Like, why didn't they pass? It's like, dude, come on. Like, if you were there for 5 seconds, you'd be hauled out on a stretcher. Like, yeah. So, and that goes for any sport. I mean, MMA for same thing. You know, guys who've never even been in a fight, they're trying to say like, oh, why didn't you do that? I would have done this. Well, no, you wouldn't have. You know,
Dodge that
yeah.
punch.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
You would have got beat a lot earlier. Is probably what happened.
Yeah, you wouldn't have even made it into the cage. And so yeah, to answer your question, there's those levels, and so then like the Olympic level is the ultimate level, and that those guys are, there's multiple time national champs who barely get even on the Olympic ladder, which is the top 10. So it's, and I wasn't on that level for sure. I knew I wasn't going to make the Olympics or anything, and so coaching can be an option, but it's all it's not exactly like a lucrative option. There's not like a lot of room past that. Thankfully nowadays, MMA has come along, and that can be a channel for wrestlers to get into. But so as far as for me, I wasn't good enough to necessarily compete on the world level or the Olympic level, and I wasn't really interested in coaching. Part of me thought, I got this degree from these good schools, and my parents also wanted me. I don't think they would have been very happy if I had just not done something beyond athletics, I guess. And so just trying to think. So yeah, and I'd gotten interested in like mixed martial arts and Brazilian jiu-jitsu actually early on, and so I transitioned into more of that stuff, which I know you're big into now. And I just went with that, but at the same time it was like I wanted to also work and kind of do the normal real world stuff.
What was your degree in too, by the way?
A great question. So it was a long journey. Bucknell had a great engineering program. So originally I was actually an engineering major, but I learned that I wasn't all that cut out for it. High school I was good at the math and science stuff, so I thought I'd give it a try. And back then, that's all the hot jobs were in engineering, especially in the Bay Area. But I ended up getting my degree in public policy with a poli-sci minor. I just found like I was mostly interested in econ, political science, policy related classes, philosophy. That's what I really enjoyed learning about. So
you mentioned it doesn't seem like any of this is from lack of like wanting to do it. Like it seemed like you loved wrestling, correct?
Yes.
And then like I think that this is a healthy realization, and I've noticed this characteristic in many people that are successful, but it's not really talked about much. I think it's a healthy realization to say, I don't know what it is, but I'm just not quite like those other guys. And there's really I can work out all day. I can lose, I can get rid of all these other aspects of my life, and I can really hone in on it. But like from a realistic standpoint, it's just not in the cards. You hear mom and dad say you can be anything you want to be, but it's like, well, what kind of within reason. I mean, even if you're born female, you can't play in the NFL at the moment. You know what I mean? So like there's limitations to certain things, right? So what kind of made you realize, and how did that feel? I'm sure it didn't feel good, but it probably led you to think of, I have some other attributes that I can work on and I can hone in on.
Yeah, I think, and that's a great point, and I've talked about it on some posts before, and it's, the world of athletics is, full of kind of these cliches that are essentially bullshit. And that's the problem, is a lot of people look to athletes for philosophy or for psychology when they're just good athletes. They're terrible philosophers and terrible psychologists, but they're trying to talk about, you can do anything, put your mind to it, or, you got to give it 110% and blah, 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 blah. And
120, I heard.
Yeah. And if you're really good, 121.
That's Josh, 120%.
Yeah. And, of course they'll say, oh, there's no such thing as genetics. It's only hard work and blah, 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 blah. And I think that can be, it's kind of a willful ignorance that can be selectively helpful, if you kind of convince yourself of that in a brief time to motivate yourself. But if we're being real and just trying to be semi-intelligent, like, you realize that stuff's all not true. You know what I mean? Like Gary Coleman's not going to be an all-star NBA center. Sorry. I loved basketball. I was obsessed with Michael Jordan when I was younger. But I learned, actually, my buddies who I played ball with.
Gary Coleman got thrown right under the bus.
Well, Vern Troyer. We'll throw Vern Troyer in there too. There's,
Hey, there is a little person police officer in Davis. I don't know if he's still around, but
Oh wow.
yeah, seeing him patrolling the streets is a little different.
Man, on the flip side, I was in the police academy with the guy who's 7 feet tall.
Holy crap!
Yeah, he was a college basketball player. He was 7 feet tall and he was thick too. Like he was, low 300s.
That's intimidating as hell.
Yeah, and he was strong.
Probably taking him an hour to get out of his car though.
Well, they had to get a different car for him.
Oh shit!
Yeah, he had to get outfitted for a different car because he wouldn't fit in a patrol car. Yeah, he's a monster. Yeah,
Driving a big rig down the street.
yeah, pretty much. Pretty much, yeah. There's some freaks out there.
So you kind of realize that these other people are just a little different than you, and then kind of what was the dialogue, or would you kind of switch to?
So yeah, so I'm big on being realistic, like pushing hard, but still keeping a rational mindset, and so if I realize, okay, I'm not going to be the best in the world at wrestling or anything like that, I would always think, well, what do I enjoy? There's kind of three things. And whenever you think about any endeavor, there's three things you kind of look for. Like one is, what am I passionate about? Two, what am I talented or gifted at? And three, what generates income? You know what I mean? So now if you're independently wealthy, then think about that. But 99.9%
Yeah,
of
I've
us.
talked about this recently, and it's these three rings. You can look at it like Olympic rings, and then find the intersection, find your sweet spot.
Right. You could even call that a Venn diagram.
There you go.
So
This guy went to college. Josh, can you get me a book or something? I need something so I can keep up over here.
Our uneducatedness is really going to show on this episode.
Poli-sci, no idea what that is. I don't know if it sounds like origami or something to me.
Or it's like you need a protractor to create one of those.
Yeah, well, it's actually it's polyamory, poli-sci, polyamory, same thing.
Yeah, we're
Just kidding.
That's an open relationship, though, right?
That is a version of the open relationship. Yes.
See, we know things.
Yeah.
Not a lot.
some stuff.
Some stuff. But yeah, those are the three things I constantly think about. And I think about, the luckiest people are ones who find things that cover all three of those, and a lot of people don't. And I think that's one thing that gets lost on the current generation is I think a lot of the millennials and Gen Z or whatever it is are brought up kind of thinking with the sense of entitlement that they can do no matter what, something that fits all three of those, when the reality is it's not the case. And if we look over human history, I mean, I don't think a lot of the sheet metal workers who are vital to this country exactly thought, oh, I'm so passionate about doing sheet metal work. You know what I mean? Like you can think of all kinds of vocations where it was more, okay, I got to put food on the table for my family. This is going to be hard. This is going to be painful. This is going to be uncomfortable, but I've got to do it. And I'm good enough that I can do it. You know what I mean? I think people need to realize that, like, I've got a fine arts major and I just want to, make a great living pursuing fine arts because I'm passionate about it. Well, cool, but that might not be realistic.
You bring up a good point because it still fulfills a lot of the things that you need to have fulfilled in order to have a good life. You're still going to have a lot of self-worth. You're still going to have good purpose. You still feel really good about yourself. The 9 to 5 that you have might not be like the ultimate thing that you truly love, but maybe at some other point, maybe while you're working, maybe while you're making a living, you could be working on, things you're going to do in the future, kind of a side hustle type of thing. Mm-hmm. But I know a lot of people that they don't really love their job, but they're very happy.
Exactly.
And they kind of, and people will criticize and say, some people that only live for the weekend. Well, some of these people, they do live for the weekend because they don't really love their job. Their job pays the bills. The job provides for the family. They have a nice family. Everybody's pretty happy, relatively speaking. Every family has their own set of like problems or whatever. But then on the weekend, they get to go fishing or they get to, enjoy themselves when they have a couple days off.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite sayings, and I think the French philosopher Voltaire said this, it was, the perfect is the enemy of the good. You know what I mean? And so I think a lot of us are thinking, what's the perfect job? And another one of these cliches that I can't stand is, find a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Well, the vast majority of us are not going to find a job we absolutely love. We are going to work many days of our lives. You know what I mean? That's reality. But if we find something that's good, that's feasible. No one's going to find something that's perfect. And like you said, I mean, living for the weekend, that may sound bad, but that's 2 out of 7 days a week. I mean, that ain't shabby, right? And I think we have to, set.
Might depend on how you're spending that time. Like if you're just drinking and, not doing shit productive at all, then maybe that's not great.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. I mean, definitely all forms of recreation are not created equal. But yeah, I think it's good to have goals and be aggressive in those goals and work hard for those goals, but also have some degree of realism within those. Otherwise, you're going to be constantly disappointed.
Have you always like had that sense of realism? Like, was that something your parents taught you to think about? Because you also mentioned like studying philosophy in college. Like, did that have an impact on the way you think about these things?
Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of considered myself, like you could say, a hardcore rationalist. I mean, both my parents. So my mom was a clinical psychologist. She had her PhD in psychology. My dad he still practices actually. He's in his late 70s and he still works, but he's a psychiatrist. So he's a medical doctor.
Well, there you go.
And so, so my whole childhood, every dinner, I mean, they divorced when I was in high school, so they're separate, but like growing up, they would always talk about, their work, and it was studying the brain and how it works. And this is all very evidence-based stuff, all very rational-based stuff. What medication does what disorder, what type of neurotransmitter imbalance contributes to what disorder, and all that kind of stuff. And so I just was kind of wired to think about those things. I think I was 13. I started reading. They had all these books. I mean, one of their wedding gifts was the full volume of works by Sigmund Freud. You know what I mean? So like on their bookshelf was it had to be like 20 books lined up. I remember front and center of all of Sigmund Freud's
Not a
writings.
bad environment to grow up in.
Yeah, no, it was, they always stressed education, always stressed, critical thinking, analytical thinking, rational thinking. And along with that, I think comes, realism.
Do you think emotions and feelings are irrational?
I think yes. Now, I think at the same time, and when I say irrational, I mean that as in they are not rational, not as in meaning they're inherently irrational.
I understand. I think sometimes when somebody hears irrational, like you're saying, sometimes you might say someone's thought process is irrational. You're not trying to be offensive.
Right.
You're just saying that you could think about that better and probably have a more optimal thought process.
Yes, exactly. I mean, like this microphone is irrational. I'm not talking down on it. I'm just saying that this microphone does not have any rationality to it. This table is irrational. So there's plenty of things that just simply lack rationality. It's not a slight on them. But I think as sentient beings, we always have to kind of think about that and try and...
Why is the microphone irrational?
I mean, it's a fixed inanimate object.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, people nowadays everyone gets offended at everything. Like I mispronounce the word "the" and it's a microaggression. But but yeah, like I think rationality needs to be embraced if we're to progress as a civilization. I mean, that's what if you look at how we even evolved, it's based on rational principles. It's if we were defending ourselves from a attack by a pack of lions, we had to use rational principles and not just emotion to deal with that.
Yeah,
and
if we just
survive.
cried or got mad,
get
as mad as you want at the lion, it's not going to solve any problems for us, probably.
Right. Right.
Pretty cool. What does it mean for you to be like? How does it help you in your day to day? Like, let's kind of stay on the topic of. We'll shift over into your career in a moment, but like, let's stay on the topic of like lifting. How does this assist you? You've gotten some pretty severe injuries, torn tricep, and you had a couple blowouts. You recently had carpal tunnel, surgery, and things like that. How does this assist in your training? Because it's good to have some rational thought towards. I'm not prepared to do that. But then at the same time, we got this other side of us who's like, fuck it, man, go for it. Like, you need to just go for it. That's what this guy does, and that's what that guy does. You need to, if you want to break an all-time world record, you better be at least a little bit irrational.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're saying all powerlifters were a little bit crazy. You know what I mean? I think Kurt Karwoski says something about that in an interview. And one of my favorite symbols is the yin and yang symbol. And I think that kind of is a emblem of kind of the way I live my life. And you got both. You got to have the dark and the light. And so when I'm lifting and training or think about my like aspirations, you can set rationality aside. You know what I mean? You can even call it ignorance. It's selective ignorance. And I think selective ignorance can be very purposeful. With the injuries and the training, kind of the interplay between rationality and irrationality is very key. Like one of the things I love about powerlifting is it's so rational, it's so objective and numbers based. You know what I mean? You either moved 400 something pounds or you did not move for, you know what I mean? It's clear. It's not up for interpretation.
Oh, what if you got a bad lift off though?
Well,
I got a bad lift off. I think it was misloaded. Those 45, those 45s are a little heavy. The judges suck.
Oh man, yeah, no, I mean, they're yeah, okay. To be
I'm
fair,
just saying excuses. I'm just messing around.
no, yeah, I got you. Yeah, I mean, it's as far on the spectrum of objectivity as it gets, pretty
Right,
much.
right.
And so, I love that. I love it. It is hyper rational. And the training makes sense. It's like, okay, if I want to improve my squat, I will train the squat to stimulate my nervous system to be more efficient. And I will train my quadriceps and my hamstrings and my glutes to more efficiently move and to grow, to engage in hypertrophy so that I can be stronger. Like it all just makes sense. But then, and with the injuries, what I think about though is like, and I don't even know if this is necessarily rational or irrational, but I never want to live in the world of what if. You know what I mean? Like, and we all will have some what ifs. I always think, well, what if I had changed my major to this? What if I had moved to this city? I mean, that's inevitable, but especially when it comes to things that we are definitely passionate about, that we're intrinsically motivated towards. I think we want to, like, my thought is, yeah, I've had major injuries. I may get more major injuries, but if I'm not going to pursue what I'm passionate about, what am I even doing? You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of almost, you call it a kamikaze mindset. You know what I mean? Like I may just go down in flames, but that's living. You know what I mean? If I'm just going through the day to day and not pursuing what I love and what I'm passionate about, with reckless abandon, so to speak, am I really alive? I don't know. It seems so. That's kind of, you can say it's irrational, and that's where like it's purposeful irrationality. You know what I mean? Because like kamikazes. I mean, you're flying a plane into your own death. That can't be rational, but I don't know. I mean, sometimes we gotta just go for it.
For you personally, when you like got into powerlifting, a lot of lifters, like you mentioned, wrestling, you just loved it. Right?
Yeah.
Even though you knew at a certain point you're not going to be the best, that you just love not like you want to not be able to be controlled by somebody else.
Yeah.
With powerlifting, obviously you're one of the best. Was that your intention getting into it? Did you kind of see, I have these advantages, I can move here, or did you just love the sport?
Definitely the latter. It was the love. Yeah, I mean, same with the wrestling. I got into it. It was very individual and it was very personal in the sense of, I want to be able to not be controlled, and I want to be able to do the controlling if I have to. Same with lifting. It's like I want to be as strong as I can. And that, I remember going to my first meet thinking, I might come in last place, but if I perform to my best, then I win. And so that's the way it's always been. It wasn't until a couple of years in that even like records like was a concept for me, a possibility. And I think that's important. It's always, we got to stay intrinsically motivated. You know what I mean? Because psychology 101 will say, worry about what you can control, not what you can't. And so I can't control what Larry Williams is going to do, what Kevin Oak's going to do. And those guys are my friends. I mean, I love those guys and they motivate me, but I can control what Andrew Herbert does. And so I'm going to worry about that. And it's improving myself. That's one other thing I love about powerlifting as opposed to a lot of other sports is it is yourself. Your opponent is yourself. When I was wrestling, I still loved the accountability aspect. It's just you on the mat. You can't blame the team. You can't blame the coach. You can't blame anything like that. But still, it's dependent on the other person. It's dependent on your opponent, which is beyond your control. So, yeah, I always just thought about it's how it made me feel, but what I wanted to do with myself. And, yeah.
You seem kind of like a, outwardly, seeing you compete several times now, you seem like kind of an aw shucks kind of guy on the outside.
Yeah.
What's going on the inside though? Like when you miss a weight, are you MF this and that, lighting shit on fire, going crazy?
Yeah, I'll be frank here, and it may not be the most like cheerful thing, but I've over most of my life become good at putting on a facade. I think I might be a decent actor because, I from a very young age, I definitely was, you could say, like endowed with more anger than I think most people have, and you could ask my dad and my parents about that. I mean, I was, a wilder kid. I've always had a lot of anger and stuff like that, but I've channeled it, and that's where I think wrestling, lifting has been great for me. but those things are still inside, and I'm hard on myself. I know that, which is both a good and a bad thing. But I'm big on turning things inward. You know what I mean? Like I don't discourage people from expressing their feelings. I think that's very important. I encourage people to do that. I think it's healthy, but I don't know. I've always hated the thought of being a complainer or of being a burden to other people, or
sore sport, like you kick something because you missed a squat or something. And like,
no, yeah,
it just outwardly looks completely ridiculous, right?
Yeah,
But you might think that in your head, like I feel like kicking something.
Exactly, and I may, once I'm by myself,
Right.
lose it a little bit. But in the presence of other people, I like to keep that composure for sure. I mean, another thing for me is in some ways, I've always considered myself a very kind of primal person. And it ties in with both the wrestling and the lifting is, and Joe Rogan even will talk about this sometimes, where it's like, there could be a basketball game going on here, a soccer game going on here, but a fight breaks out over here, everybody's going to want to watch that fight. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing for me. So I played all the different sports, but like when I think about baseball, like what even is that? Like we're going to put like 3 pillows spaced out, and we're going to put like a mound in between them, and we're going to swing a piece of wood against an arbitrary like round object, and then we're going to run, what is this? Whereas like I'm concerned, who's the strongest, who's the fastest,
It's
who's
completely
the
like
toughest.
made up game.
Exactly, yeah.
But fighting makes sense because you have conversation with somebody. There's a huge disagreement on whose space is whose, or there's a huge other disagreement of
right, who's more tan than who? Like, you got to settle that, right?
Who's more jacked, right?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, so fighting and any variation therein, whether it's boxing, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, judo, anything like that, and lifting, whether it's strongman, Olympic lifting, powerlifting, that's elemental. And then I mean, I don't run track or anything, but still I get that too. Like who can run the furthest or who can run the fastest? Those things all make sense to me. And I think that comes back to the rationality aspect too. Like it makes rational sense to want to see what those human capabilities are. Like I'm not as concerned with what the human capability is for kicking a field goal.
Yeah, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And also if you think about like the Olympics, some of the sports that we really enjoy, like the 100-meter, is very popular. People get all excited for that. It's a huge event.
Fastest man in the world.
But like the shot put isn't as exciting because people are like, I don't really know what it means to throw the thing 70 feet. Like,
right.
I'm not sure. Like, it looked like it was cool, looked good, but it's like you don't see them in direct competition with each other throwing it the furthest. I think that sometimes what ends up being a little bit boring about powerlifting is it's like you're not, if all 3 of us were trying to lift 500 pounds as fast as we could,
right,
for as many reps as we could that were clean, I think a lot of people would want to tune in and see like who can do the most amount of reps in the shortest period of time or something like that. It's more exciting.
Absolutely. And not to get too meta here, but I think, the communists might say something else, but most people agree that humans are inherently competitive. Competition is actually how we evolved and survived as a species. It is ingrained in our DNA. And that gets at what you're saying. When we see 2 or more people going head to head at something on essentially a level playing field, whether it's the track or the wrestling mat or who knows what, we are drawn to that competition, seeing that, who proves their mettle more than the other person.
A dance off, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, well, that's what we're doing after this, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Break dance fighting.
I warmed up a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, I still got to stretch.
I don't want to embarrass you guys.
Oh. Can you get closer to the mic, Nsima? Sorry.
Yeah, I'll get closer to mine.
Thank you.
I'm real curious about this actually. As we're talking about this competition, you had multiple. I mean, I don't know how many injuries you've had, but I know personally that when I've had injuries or surgeries, those are like when I was processing those times in the moments in the months. Those are some like really I just hated those times because I didn't have an outlet for myself. And you mentioned that like you don't let that show in public, right? You'll do whatever in private. But when that happened to you, for whatever periods of time that you were off, what did you substitute it with? How did you deal?
Great question, because I think that applies to a lot of things. So I still remember
Booze and cocaine, right? I mean, not in that order,
right?
Obviously.
Yeah. What is the right order there? Who knows? That's a philosophical question. No, my first major injury from sports was my junior year in high school, and I was wrestling, and I blew out my left knee, tore the cartilage, messed a few things up, and I had to get surgery for that. And I remember it took a long time for that to sink into me. And I didn't even go to the doctor like until I couldn't really even walk. I kept trying to wrestle on it. It got to the point where I couldn't even really get into referee's position. My whole knee was completely swollen up, and I could barely walk downstairs. And I realized, okay. So I had surgery on it. And I remember even, the doc saying, oh, you're going to be out at least 8 weeks. And looking back, that's nothing. But at that time, I was furious. I was like, F that, I'm going to be back in 4 weeks. I was just like, no way I'm not training for that long. And, but it also kind of knocked me down a few notches as far as like, you do bleed, you are mortal, and so it taught me a lot of things, but it also put me in a very bad place where I couldn't do any of the things that I loved. And so then, I had a few more injuries, and it was, I think, in college early on where I had an injury again that sidelined me, and I realized this is so terrible. So I ended up actually just getting a piece of paper and writing down all the things I can do when I'm injured, because I needed that for some kind of comfort. And so it's the books I want to read, it's the TV shows or the movies I want to watch, the social events I may want to do, the people I want to connect with better. I mean, because I've never been the best social butterfly, and so and a lot of times I sideline things for training. Like if you ask my mom growing up, my buddies would always, they'd call, this is back before cell phones, and so you'd call the landline at home and, hey, Mrs. Herbert, is Andrew there? And most of the time she'd be like, no. And they'd be like, he's at the gym, right? And they're like, my mom was like, yeah. And so that was just kind of known, like, okay, Andrew can't hang out, he's at the gym. And so, so we sideline a lot of social things, but I think social connectedness is very important. I'm learning that more and more as I get older. And so whether it's with family or with friends. And so I would make this list of all the things that I could do. And then in addition, the physical things. So going back to my high school injury, when I blew up my left knee, I was still going to the YMCA and training my right leg. And just doing all kinds of leg extensions, leg curls, one leg movements, as well as all my upper body stuff.
I think there's some science that shows that you get a training effect on the other leg even when you're not training.
Exactly.
Same thing with the arms. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. When I blew up my left arm, I was still doing right-sided movements. And I would say that I think there probably is a benefit there, but even if there was zero physical benefit, there is monumental psychological benefit to doing something. You know what I mean? I think it's good to be task-oriented. I think back to, it relates to my job somewhat when I see there's critical incidents. I mean, you can think of 9/11 as the most critical of incidents, and how so many people were freaking out. And as a first responder, a lot of times when there are a lot of people freaking out, you just give a very simple task. Once people have a task or a duty to perform, it really calms them down. They're freaking out subsides a lot. And so it's the same thing. I've got an injury, I can't use my arm. I could freak out, or okay, I'm just going to do some machine presses with my right arm. I have a task, and that occupies my mind. It makes me just feel better, even if it doesn't accomplish anything.
In terms of in terms of your powerlifting, a lot of powerlifters, especially maybe a couple years back, a lot of powerlifters would just get big and fat.
Yeah.
I think maybe I made that a little bit too famous or something. I'm not sure.
No.
But I'm definitely guilty of getting up over 300, up well over 300 pounds. For yourself, you've always stayed in good shape. You've always stayed lean. I think a lot of the people listening right now would love to know, how the hell do you do that? How do you build that kind of size? Because what are you now, 260?
Yeah, 255, something around that. Yeah.
Yeah, you look great. You keep in good shape. I've never seen you out of shape. How what's the diet like, and is there something specific with the training? Obviously, a lot of consistency is built in there.
Yeah, I think it's when you mentioned the history of very overweight powerlifters. I think, and it's interesting because so many times when I've talked to people who and say, "Oh, I'm a powerlifter," they're like, "What? You're a powerlifter?" But I thought those guys were all really fat, and part of me wonders about to what degree that's selective memory on people's parts. You know what I mean? Because Ed Cohn was jacked, Kurt Karwoski was jacked. I mean, there's plenty of examples of jacked weightlifters and powerlifters going back a long ways. Strongmen. I mean, Kazmaier, John Paul Sigmarsson. I mean, these guys are.
Kazmaier looked awesome.
Yeah, and these are the '80s. You know what I mean? So, but I think there can be a lot of resentment and jealousy, you know, where people are like, oh, well, that guy's so much stronger than I am. I'm just going to focus on the ones that are really fat and assume that they're all really fat, you know? So I think there can be misperceptions there. But for me, you know, I've always been lean, you know, and you know, I think of genetics in that sense. Like, you know, my mom is thin, my dad is big framed, but you know, on the thinner side, and so I'm lucky in that regards. You know, I'm grateful for that. As far as like my diet, I do. I mean, you know, when I first started getting into fitness, I mean, this is like age 10 or 11, I started reading nutrition labels, you know, and actually I remember I started drinking the Ultra Slim Fast shakes. Remember at that time?
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't because I was trying to get thinner, it's because those were the first meal replacement shakes. You know, had vitamins, minerals, protein, calcium, all that stuff. And so I would drink those. And, you know, and from there it's always like, okay, I'm going to not consume too many sweets, too much junk food. I'm going to try and get protein with every meal. And I'm going to stay physically active, and that's where it's at. Like, I've never been a calorie counter or a meticulous dieter. It's just kind of like, and I like to follow the 90% rule. You know what I mean? It's like and again, that's the perfect is the enemy of the good. I think people who try and have 100% of their meals perfect, they're always going to fail. But if you look for like, okay, 90%, that's doable. You know, 21 meals a week, that's like 18. So you got 3 really nice apple fritter, you know, French toast meals in there, but the rest are pretty good. You're going to do all right. So.
Pretty much just feeding yourself all the time, not allowing yourself to get too hungry, and having large amounts of protein. Is that kind of some of the basics for you?
Yeah. I mean, and also, you know, through wrestling and whatnot, you know, I mean, I've cut weight and weighed in, you know, hundreds of times, and so I'm very, you know, accustomed to like how my body reacts to different things, and I know, you know, some tricks to like you can eat high volume, low calorie foods to feel more full. You know, fibrous, vegetable, you know, soups, things like that. High water things. You know, chew gum.
Like watermelon or something. You can get a pretty good amount of watermelon, and it's not that calorically dense.
Exactly.
Or,
Celery.
as you said, vegetables.
Yeah, celery, broccoli, all that stuff. You know, and then, you know, if you're trying to avoid eating, I mean, I'll just chew gum. You know what I mean? If I'm chewing gum, that means no eating. And you know, it can be hard, but I mean, anything worthwhile doing is probably going to be a little bit hard.
How about the cardio side of things for you? Like, even throughout your lifting career, did you do cardio to an extent consistently? I don't know if you grappled at all during that time, but how was that for you?
So that relates kind of on my development within the sport. So coming up wrestling, I did just tons of cardio. I mean, we were running all the time, not just to lose weight, but for conditioning. It'd be distance runs, interval sprints, buddy carries up and down the stadium steps, like just a ridiculous amount of that. And, you know, and then the wrestling itself, of course, is very, you know, anaerobically taxing. And then Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, as you know very well, is also a part of that. So I had a very extensive cardio background before I got into powerlifting. I got into powerlifting. My first competition was actually right after I had finished the Fire Academy. And so the Fire Academy is also very metabolically taxing. You're kind of moving constantly. You're dragging very heavy fire hose. You're moving ladders. You're in turnouts, which are inherently heavy and very hot themselves. So I was doing a lot of cardio there. And so I always felt like I had to do some kind of cardio. I think one thing that helped me make a lot of progress early on was I backed off some of that cardio. You know what I mean? Like, not to nothing, but significantly less. And I even remember in high school, like, I had friends like at the gym who just knew me from weightlifting, and they were like, dude, think of how strong you get if you just stopped wrestling. You know what I mean? And I'd be like, well, I'm not going to stop wrestling. You know, but I'd think about that, you know, because who doesn't want to be stronger? And, you know, also early on in my powerlifting career, I was getting back into wrestling. I had actually I'd run into some guys at the gym. I learned about some wrestling clubs in my area. And actually there's a high school that has a very good head coach. And they had, at that time, a very good heavyweight. He placed 2 times in the California State. He ended up getting a scholarship to wrestle in college. But when you're a big guy, and this is both in jiu-jitsu and wrestling, it's hard to find training partners, you know? And so like they brought me in to train with this kid. And so I wrestled with him a lot, and I was like, oh man, I love this, you know, but I was trying to do both. And it's like, I always use the analogy, you chase 2 birds, you miss both of them, you know, and I'd go wrestle from like 3 to 5 because their practices were at 3, and then I'd drive to Boss Barbell and I'd lift, and I'd be like, my lifts are kind of down, you know, and I had that realization, and it comes also to the realism that we were talking about earlier. It was like, I'm a very good wrestler, but I'm a excellent power lifter. You know what I mean? And so it was kind of triaging, and I realized, okay, I want to be the best powerlifter I can be. So I stopped wrestling and cut back on a lot of cardio. That being said, I think I maybe went too far in the direction of no cardio for a while. And the more I've always been a student of the game, you know, learning, you know, from you and Stan and folks talking about walks and bodybuilder friends of mine, you know, the concept of low to medium intensity cardio took a long time for me to appreciate that, because coming from a wrestling background, it was always just balls to the wall. Like you're running as hard as you can. So it was high stress, which is painful. You know what I mean? If you're go run 5 miles as fast as you can, you know, like that sucks, you know, but like, so it took me a while to actually appreciate, okay, I'm going to get on this uphill treadmill and I'm going to not let my heart rate go too high. I'm not going to go too fast, but it has all kinds of health benefits. So a couple of years ago, I started incorporating more of the steady state, low intensity cardio, and it didn't impair recovery much. It felt better. There's just so much research supporting it, both for psychological and physical benefits, that I think I'm at a good place now where I balance it. You know, I do that with the lifting, and so I've kind of evolved.
Yeah, even just training at like 135 beats. I'm sure it varies a little bit for each person, but there's a lot of research on that. Training in that zone for 30 to 60 minutes a day can be really beneficial, and it can open up the left ventricle of your heart. That's where, you know, most people get kind of clogged up. So it's wise to try to find some sort of training, and walking is not enough. Walking does not get you there. But walking is a great start.
Yes.
You know, walking is an excellent start for anybody that's listening. You could also just, when you lift, when you work out, you could maybe wear a heart rate monitor, maybe you know, track your heart rate in some way, and just try not to take a lot of breaks. Try to keep moving.
Oh, absolutely. Like, you know, earlier I was talking about how I love supersets. And so before I got into powerlifting, when I would go to, you know, commercial gym, a lot of times I would superset. You know, I'd do antagonistic movements. I'd row and I'd bench. I'd press and I'd pull up. I'd do a quad movement and a hamstring movement. And I loved that because, one, it saved a lot of time, but it also created that cardio metabolic effect, kept my heart rate up.
It doesn't really impede the strength, you know,
Right.
because it's the opposite muscle group.
Yeah, I mean, there's even
Might pull away from it a tiny bit sometimes.
right. I mean, in some sense, it could even potentially help it where, like, say you're doing curls and tricep extensions. Like, by definition, if I'm doing a curl, I have to be relaxing my tricep. So it's almost forcing you to rest the muscle that you're going to work when you do the tricep extensions, and vice versa. So I loved that. Obviously, when I got into powerlifting and focusing on maximal strength, that's where I started taking longer rest periods and doing less of the supersetting. I'll save the supersetting more for like accessory movements.
Do you mess with much isolation stuff?
Not a lot. You know, so with my elbow, before it ruptured, I still had a lot of tricep pain. So I slowly, surely kind of cut out all my tricep isolation movements. I never was big on bicep isolation movements, and that's just kind of because of training economy. It's like you only have so many hours in the day. I'm going to focus on more bang for my buck movements.
You look like bench, squat, deadlift, bent over row, overhead press. You have
Pull-ups.
You have that physique. You have that like density to your body.
Yeah, and a lot of that came from the habit from wrestling. It was like, we're not going to do curls and extension. I mean, we're going to do compound lifts, get in, get out, that kind of thing. And so, but there is the evolution with that too, where I partially tore my right pec, and from that, one thing I started doing on my bench days is a couple sets of really light dumbbell flies with a good stretch before I hit the bench, and I found that was somewhat preventive of like straining my pecs.
It's an evolution. You end up recognizing like, wow, that was actually really foolish of me to not pay any attention to that form and that style of training, bodybuilding or isolation movements. You're like, those things are so dumb. As you get older and you get more mature and you get in the game a little bit more, you're like, that could benefit me, because maybe training my bicep will just help the overall structure around my elbow, so my elbow doesn't get inflamed and get all junked up. And same thing with your pec. Maybe, you know, over a long period of time, maybe you were kind of, you know, rotated forward a little bit. putting more strain on the pec. And maybe if you did, tons of face pulls or rotator cuff work, maybe you could have avoided some of that, right?
100%. And just to piggyback off that, our dear friend Steffi Cohen, who she's great, and I pick her brain sometimes. And go back to high school when I hurt my knee. I remember my first day of physical therapy. The guy said, "Never do leg extensions." Okay, and I've had other physical therapists have said that, and they talk about the shearing forces and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So then fast forward to a few years ago, and I started developing like some quadricep tendonitis. And also, relatively speaking, my quads were a weak point compared to like my hams and my glutes, my posterior chain. So I always wanted to bring them up. And, leg extensions is kind of one of the only real quadricep isolation movements. And so I remember I contacted Steffi and I was like, hey, you're brilliant when it comes to all this stuff. Like, what do you think about these leg extensions? Because I've been told, oh, never do them, and it's a shearing stress. But at the same time, I want to like get blood flow to the joint, strengthen my quads, things like that. And what she said is, the dose makes the poison. You know what I mean? I'll never forget that saying because it makes so much sense. You know what I mean? You can die from drinking too much water. You know what I mean? Like, or you can die from drinking too little water. Like, anything is harmful with too much and can be ineffective or harmful with too little. And so, yeah, leg extensions, it's like, yeah, don't go ham, don't max out on your leg extension, but, put moderate weight on there and do a number of reps. Like, that's okay. Like, and
maybe
so
even just move your leg on the leg extension machine, but don't put your feet underneath the part that has the resistance on it. Just
exactly.
Something.
Or use a band or
yeah.
something. Yeah. And so I think that's just so important. I think, as humans, we tend to want to see things in absolute terms. Don't do this 100%, do this 100%, when in reality, the vast majority of things are actually shades of gray in between.
Mm-hmm. So then doing some of those movements to help, like, like you were saying, like stretch and open up the pec, is that the furthest you've like strayed away from powerlifting, like since you jumped in? Because it seems like you haven't deviated from like the ultimate goal of just being a fucking savage powerlifter.
That one set of flies, man.
Oh yeah,
that was it, right?
Now you're a bodybuilder.
So I do like bodybuilding, and to be fair, I actually do want to get on stage at some point.
Hell yeah, you would do great.
Thank you. I mean, it's like pretty much every meet I've done, I've had people be like, "Hey, are you a bodybuilder?" And I'm always like, "Well, no." And they'll be like, "You should do it," And so, you get that encouragement, and then you think back to, Arnold, one of my original motivations, and then Ronnie Coleman's one of my idols.
He would get insane, huh?
It would be crazy.
He would get weird.
So dope.
Dorian Yates is another idol of mine. These guys just motivate me, and I want to give it a try. I mean, I've done strongman competitions. Obviously, I've done powerlifting, and I want to do bodybuilding. It's like they all make sense. But for my training wise, in the last 7 years or so of strictly powerlifting, any isolation bodybuilding stuff I've done has been with the intent of helping the powerlifting. So
makes sense.
I'm really curious about this because you kind of mentioned it in the beginning. The squat is like now your best movement, and it didn't used to be. The deadlift used to be. So you said that Dan Green shared and helped you out with, some technique work. And
yes,
obviously everybody has different limb lengths, so not everything is universal. But what do you think are some of the big concepts of squatting that Dan helped you change that you do think could be universal with lifters that are listening in?
Yeah. So and Dan's, I've been very fortunate to have a lot of great mentors over the years. Mark, you're one of my mentors. Stan Efforting's been a mentor.
Damn, I'll take that. Thank you.
Dan Green's been my biggest mentor. I trained with him at his gym, and with the squat, one aspect of it is targeting your weaknesses, and so which is going to be different for people, like you said. For me, it was my quads being relatively weaker, and that usually translates to coming out of the hole. And so, Dan had me doing, high bar squats. In other words, pushing the weight forward and making it more upright posture, quad dominant, and pausing in the hole. You do like a 1, 2, 3 count and up. So you're really hammering your quads under greater stress in the hole, and also front squats. That's kind of even more than a high bar squat. The more you shift the weight forward, the more it's a quad movement. And with front squats, it holds you accountable because you have to stay upright or else you're going to lose the bar. Yeah. And so like those things were huge. But then also certain kind of mental cues, like I know one thing he taught me was because sometimes when it gets heavy enough, it would pitch me forward a little bit. I might even still get the lift, but you don't want that. And so he talked about, don't think of it as a bar on your back. Think of it as like a boulder on your back. And the reason, and so that comes down to surface area. If you think of a bar, then you've only got, a small amount of your back covered, right around your scapula. But if you think of a boulder, your entire upper back is covered with an object. So you need to tighten up and really fight against this boulder as you hit the hole and start to ascend out of the hole. And it's a mental cue that kind of teaches you to tighten everything maximally.
Yeah, it might be the difference between just having that weight sitting behind you, which is kind of hard to manage, versus like having like a weight vest on. It's like it's just an overall just tons of pressure on your entire body. That surface area analogy makes a lot of sense. Dan Green, there's no tricks with that guy. There's nothing like confusing about his methods, right? I mean, it's just like, hey, I think if we build up your quads, which is a big part of a squat, we're just going to annihilate them. So front squats and things like that too, right?
Yeah, high bar, and then the safety bar is great too, because it's so nice because it takes the stress off your elbows and your shoulders. You can go hands free, so you can do like a Hatfield version, get even better range of motion, but still focuses on the quads. And it has the added benefit of the safety bar tries to pitch you forward. So just along with that boulder analogy, you're really trying to really strain your thoracic and lumbar spine against it to keep from pitching forward.
I think Dan Green and like his evolution was really pivotal to raw training.
Yeah.
I think Rhino came through, and when Stan came through, it was a huge thing, and people were like, wow, this guy, not only is lifting these world record weights, but he also looks great. Yes. And then Dan kind of looks like a bodybuilder too. He looks like he's a couple weeks out from a show. He's friggin' massive.
Yeah.
But I think what was huge, what I remember was the methodology. When he started to talk about how he trained, I think it opened up a lot of other people's minds, or may have closed their minds off to certain other styles of training. Do you remember the article West of West Side?
I was about to say that, his first article. Yeah,
it was really, really controversial, and I believe it was on Juggernaut's website. But like West of West Side, I mean, you could have thought like a war was about to pop off, back then, because people were like, "Hey, man, you can't say bad stuff about Westside Barbell," and it wasn't really necessarily him saying bad things about Westside Barbell. No. It was more about just the way that he trained, his style, and how with this new evolution of training and how you're performing on the platform without powerlifting gear, maybe we should be open-minded to the fact that there might be another way a different way to train, a more optimal way to train. And now you do see some people implementing Westside methods, and there's a lot of amazing things that come from Westside. Louis will kind of always point out that anytime you do anything different, he'll be like, that's Westside. He'll kind of throw that in there. A lot of great methods have come from there, but I think Dan kind of I guess he really just solved the confusion. People were confused.
Yeah.
They're like, I'm going to try Westside for raw lifting, and they just didn't maybe understand that Westside was very specific towards how they trained in that gym. And if you were outside that gym, you might get kind of confused on exactly what they were doing.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I was, like I said, I've been a student of the game for a long time. And so
2013?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And so I started when I was in high school when the internet started becoming widespread. So yes, I am old. And but about 1999, I started reading this website called T-Mag, Testosterone Magazine. And then you were on it too.
Yep.
I remember you from the forums, and I'd be interested about powerlifting, and Dave Tate, who wonderful guy, I can't say enough good things about him, but he would talk about it, and he was a West Side guy, and I remember hearing about that. And so then I went away to college on the East Coast, but I'm starting reading about that stuff, and I didn't understand gear like squat suit, deadlift suit, bench. I didn't know any of that. I was just like, oh, okay, you dynamic effort, maximal effort, and I even tried to sort of like emulate that in the college gym or whatnot. But a funny thing is, I remember I saw the name Westside Barbell, and I thought, Westside Barbell, that must be in California. Like, awesome, because that's the West Side. Like, sweet, when I graduate, I'm going to go back to California, and I'm going to train at Westside. And I was so bummed when I found out, no, it's in Ohio. Like, oh, I can't train there. But yeah, no, I think, to address what you were talking about, like, Dan and I we've had breakfast with Louis. Like we've hung out at Westside. Like there's a ton of respect there, mutual respect. I love Louis, man. And I think that's the thing. Unfortunately, in this day and age, we talked about trolling and stuff like that. People love to see conflict. And, and it's unfortunate, because Dan never meant any slight against Westside. It was just like you said, opening your mind, trying different methods, and there may be better ways to do things. And any decent person is going to want to see better. I guarantee Louis wants to see progressive methods of training. You know what I mean? Even if he's not coming up with it.
Right.
If you love the sport, you want to see that. Just like, I've had world records, but I love the sport. I want to see any record I have get broken. You got to want that. And so, I think it's a shame. I mean, same, I was thinking about it with you, like, you post a lot of information on like the carnivore diet and stuff like that. And it blows my mind. I'll read some of the comments, and people, it's like you're insulting their mother or something. You know what I mean? Like why is this conflict coming up? Like you're literally offering free content saying, hey, this is a method to try. Open your mind up to this method. It may help you. It may not. Nothing like you got to do this. You got to, and people like get all upset about it. You know what I mean? So it's just the same thing with, Dan writing about Westside. Like there's nothing to get upset about here. Like it's all just trying to help.
Yeah, I think it actually has been helpful for me to have that criticism, because now I try my best to just say, this is my experience. This is what's worked well for. I mean, you'll still have people flare up over all kinds of things, but I'll just say, this is me. This is what I've done. This you might find this useful.
Yeah.
I'll just try to leave it at that. And then it's like, if you say anything, you can't say that I'm wrong, because it was a statement I made about what I've done.
Yeah.
And you're not me, so you don't know what I've, you know what I mean? So it leaves it, it kind of leaves it, it leaves it closed off. And then if I read a comment that's negative, it's easier for me to identify how irrational it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So rather than me saying, hey, the carnivore diet works, it works for everybody, which I actually do believe. I believe like if you put America on like chicken breast and steak, they would lose weight.
Oh yeah. And there's evidence to back that up. Too.
Right. And if I was just to say like, hey, this has been my experience, I did this, it helps me control for calories. It's something that I enjoy doing, because I feel that it's the best way for me to diet in terms of being able to control myself. Really, that's the battle that I'm facing every day, is to try to control my urges to want to eat all kinds of different crap, basically. And it's been, for me, it's been the most useful diet in those terms. And now it's more just like a meat-forward, meat-minded diet, protein first type of thing, more so than just a carnivore diet.
One of the coolest things that I seen in this gym was you squatting, I think it was like 800 pounds, just in strong knee sleeves, beltless. But right afterwards, you went right to your notebook. And I mean, this notebook was so beat up. Like I got a picture of it and everything. I thought it was great. For someone like me, like I can definitely track stuff in my log or whatever, but like, how do you utilize that? Like, how do you reference it and go back and like learn from, everything that you have written down?
So that brings back some nostalgia for me, because I still remember, and I still have my first workout notebook that I started in 2001. Sick. And I still remember what motivated me to do it. So that was my sophomore year. It might have been into my freshman year, actually, in college. And so there was one of the captains of the wrestling team. His name is Brian Newman. He's actually a spinal surgeon at Johns Hopkins now. But he was, just insane workhorse. He's one of the big influences on me. And he beat the shit out of me daily. Like he split my eye open. My eyebrows been glued back together because of him. So bloody noses, bloody lips. He was a maniac, but he's very, very tough, very hardworking. And I remember, we'd train together all the time, and he'd be like, he had a notebook. And he's like, Andrew, you need to have a notebook. And I'm like, okay. And so I get one, and I start keeping notes in it. But it's like so great. Like I for accountability, but as far as memory too, like I don't have the greatest like short-term memory. And so like it sucks to go to a workout on Monday and you're trying to do what you did last Monday, but you can't remember what you did, So I just love that. And as you keep doing it, and I encourage everybody to do it, and you kind of develop like your own abbreviations to make it fast. You know what I mean? Like I'll write a weight and say it's my last set and maybe I almost got it. I'll write like a B, which means I barely got it. Or I didn't quite get it, I'll write an A, I almost got it. You know what I mean? And then if it's a PR, I'll put a hyphen a dash on the margin, and I'll put PR next to it. And if it's a 3-rep PR, then I'll put 3 PR. You know what I mean? So it's this code you develop, but I can flip back through that and see where are the PRs, what did I do on this day, what did I do on this year, and it holds you accountable, but it also just helps you remember everything. It's it's just part of the game, part of the ritual.
Yeah, I just thought it was great, and then like I said, I took a picture of it because like how beat up it was.
Yeah.
And like it just shows that like you're definitely using the hell out of this thing.
So
I
I
thought it was
sweat all
great.
over it. There's a few pages that have blood on them. Like, I mean, it's just, yeah. A lot of people use their phones. I'm very low tech. I'm a bit of a caveman like that. And so, yeah, I've always just liked to use pen and paper.
Probably
there's
way
something
better
different.
that way.
Yeah, there's something different about writing it down, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially for goals and stuff. We talk about that a lot on the podcast, but also like the distraction too. Like if you're writing shit on your phone and then all of a sudden,
Oh, yeah. Text message.
you're
Someone sliding into your DMs.
that's main. Yeah, Nsima sending you pictures again.
Oh,
You're
yeah.
not gonna say no.
I told you. Yeah, it's hard to say no to that. I'll be honest.
So yeah, let's maybe switch gears a little bit and talk about your profession. And you did mention earlier about like schedule, and you mentioned about tasks and how having tasks and having a schedule can just really make you or help you to feel good because your mind is occupied. We went through a quarantine, and now the country's going through a lot of change at the moment, and I think that people are more stressed out than normal. People have more anxiety than normal. People are fearful of the future, maybe more than normal, fearful of the election and so on, of what's what's the future of the United States. How have you personally just kind of kept a schedule even during the quarantine? Did it make you busier because you're a police officer, firefighter, and paramedic?
Well, so there's like two parts to it time-wise. So the shelter in place, all that stuff happened back in March, and I was still full duty. And so I watched, and every day was different. One of the first COVID deaths in the country was in Santa Clara County, the county I work in. And so I remember when that happened, and every day seemed to change, like, okay, what kind of PPE is personal protective equipment we're going to use, masks, gloves, gowns, goggles, whatnot, and what's the protocol. And we were just learning as we go, and it's one of those things where, police by and large have kind of seen it all, you know what I mean? Like you see horrific things, and that's where policies are developed, how to deal with them, whether it's active shooters, suicides, hostage barricades, things like that, kidnappings, vehicle pursuits and all that. But this was unprecedented. It was like, we've never seen this before. So we're all learning as we go. And so there was that aspect. Then early May is when I had my surgery. And so that put me out on medical leave. And so that's the second timeline. And right shortly thereafter is when kind of the second, crisis came out. And that's kind of the law enforcement, police issues. I don't even know what to call. I'll just call it the crisis. There's a hard way to describe it. But and the unfortunate thing with that, and as far as getting to the task aspect, is I was off. You know what I mean? And I think it weighed on me almost more because I knew I've got a ton of respect for anyone who puts on the uniform and the badge, any branch, the military, federal, state, county, city, and I know that because I've worked with so many of those folks and I've seen some of the great things that they do. And to be on the sideline, I think anyone who's a halfway decent police officer, firefighter, EMT, soldier, anything like that, you don't want to be on the sidelines. You get into that because you want to be a person of action. And so I felt very bad knowing that my brothers and sisters were on the front lines and I was sitting at home on my recliner, with bandages on my hands. And so it weighed on me, and I didn't have a task, and so part of me, so I did kind of like get on social media and try to post a few things just to kind of, because I saw there was a major gap in the conversation of a lack of knowledge, you know what I mean? Which happens in any conversation, but you had basically a multitude of people talking about problems in the police, the way the police operate in all these different police incidents. The vast majority of these people had zero training, zero experience in anything related to law enforcement. And it drove me a little bit crazy because if I extrapolate that to any other profession, you know what I mean? Like, so I had surgery on my hands. Am I going to expect this surgeon to explain every little aspect of the procedure to me and to every other patient? No, I'm going to defer to the fact that he has lots of training and experience in doing surgeries. You know, when I have work done on my car, I don't expect the auto mechanic to tell me everything he does, and I'm sure as shit not going to go to the auto mechanic and say, "Hey, I think you're doing it wrong." You know, I can barely change my oil, but I think you're doing it wrong. I think it's not really safe the way you're doing things. I think you got to change everything up. No, I'm going to defer to his training and expertise. But for some reason, when it comes to police and also when it comes to politics, people with absolutely no knowledge on either of those things feel completely entitled to run their mouth about it. And I get some of the motivations behind that. Like, I get that.
People are just frustrated too, you know.
People are absolutely frustrated, and absolutely things occur. Like, for example, the George Floyd incident. That, you know, I had friends talk to me because I condemned it, and everyone I know condemned it, and you're like, wow, I've never seen such a unanimous, vocal condemnation of a police action by police. And I said, well, that's because we all recognized it was murder. You know what I mean? Like, straight up. Like, it's, you know, because we who actually have worked on the streets for years and had training in all kinds of defensive tactics and been in those kinds of altercations, know, yeah, you don't do that. Like, a knee on the neck ever, much less for 8.5 minutes. You don't freaking do that. And so we recognize that. Whereas other incidents have come out where we recognize the details, the nuances, as well as the case law and the policies and procedures that apply, and realize, okay, it may look bad, but it actually is legal, or it actually is justified. Or, you know, if you actually saw the entire footage as opposed to just the split-second smart cam footage at the end, you would realize it is justified. And so, you know, but yeah, so I understand the frustration 100%. I wish people understood the degree to which they're being spoon-fed selective information by the media as opposed to the whole picture. Like, when I think about this crisis, I think of four elements to it. I think of the education system, I think of the law enforcement, criminal justice system, I think of the political system, and I think of the media. All four have problems. All four have massive room for improvement, okay? One of the four, I believe, is fundamentally broken, and that's the media, okay? Politics, yeah, there's problems there. Things that could, you know, I think a third-party system or more than two-party system would be very vital to improving our political climate. And other things can be done there. Law enforcement, for sure. You know, I'm in it. I know there's room for improvement. We all need body cams. You know what I mean? Like, better accountability, better training, for sure. Weeding out, identifying the bad actors, the bad apples, whatnot. Absolutely, 100%. Education. You know, I think, and I've had this discussion with people, I think it's a shame the direction our educational system has gone, especially as far as like our middle school and high school kids, you know, because that's when they're old enough to appreciate some degree of nuance and societal application of things, but they're young enough that it's early enough to basically influence them for the better. And so I've always thought that, or not always, but in the last 15 years, thought that every kid before they turn 18, before they finish high school, should have a semester of civics, which used to be in all the schools. Learn about the structure of the government, learn about how government operates. Part of that class should be on police interactions. And it should teach people about the laws of search and seizure, the laws of detention, laws of arrest, the concept of an all-points bulletin, the concepts of a BOL, a be on the lookout.
Why do you believe in that?
So I'll tell you why. And I've had this conversation actually with many people, and including some people that are fairly intelligent. I mean, I think in any topic there's going to be the people that are just out there, and either they're crazy or they're just really stupid, and it is what it is. But there are some very intelligent people with all kinds of different stances on this topic. And so one common thing I've heard is people talk about, well, you know, this cop stopped me for no reason, you know what I mean? And I didn't do anything. And I'll say, that's totally possible. That what that means is that person doesn't understand the concept of a detention or the concept of, say, a BOL. And what I mean by that is, say, take you know, my city, any city, you know, a crime occurs or someone calls, and most of these things are generated by calls from the general public, okay? So the police are not generating this. Someone calls in and says, hey, there's a suspicious person looking into cars. And we all know in the Bay Area, there's tons of cars get broken into all the time. Things get stolen. They give a vague description of this person because they only saw them briefly. I saw this person was walking, westbound on El Camino Real. All right. Police are going to get that over the radio. That's a be on the lookout. BOL for a, approximately 5'10", medium build, light-skinned male, approximately 30 years old. I mean, that's very, very vague. Wearing blue jeans. You know what I mean? Dispatch is going to try and get as much info as possible, but it's always going to be imperfect. Give it to the patrol officers. So a patrol officer is driving around, sees someone that somewhat matches that description, understanding that callers are going to give imperfect info. He may see someone who's, say, 6'1". Well, that's close enough, or maybe they're 230. Well, that's close to 200. Or maybe they're wearing, gray pants, but it's similar enough. And so what that creates is what's called reasonable suspicion. Reasonable suspicion means that you believe that this person, there's a likelihood this person may be associated to the criminal activity. It's a very low burden of proof, so to speak, but it gives the officer the right to stop that person. The person is not under arrest, but they're also not free to leave. Okay. And people need to understand that. And that's part of the investigative process. The cop will seek to identify them. They might find out the person has warrants. The person might be on parole or probation. They may have a search clause in their probation, which entitles them to be searched. They'll ask questions. Some of those questions may be uncomfortable to the person. Because
the line of questioning might seem like it's accusing you of something.
Exactly. And people need to keep in mind that police are both trained and experienced in basically being lied to all the time. All the time. Okay. And that's never going to change. So they're going to be skeptical about everything they hear. But they're going to make this stop. They're going to do the investigative steps. And sometimes those steps take time. And that's where I get that people can be frustrated, because I've been detained before, both as a child and as an adult. I've been stopped on the street. I've been stopped in my car. I get it. Like, it gets back to the earlier thing I talked about, where I think a lot of people feel like entitled to have like a comfortable life. And that's not always the case. Like, I don't know a single person who enjoys being stopped by the cops. I've never enjoyed it. I don't know anybody who's ever enjoyed it, but it's part of life. It's part of living in a civilized society that has law enforcement. So, and so they're part of the investigation. Say they may run your name and date of birth through dispatch. That may take time. Dispatch has to run through various databases and do checks, and they're going to have you put you at what's called a position of disadvantage. They might have you sit on the curb. That may seem demeaning, but the reality is that police are trained and experienced in folks that resist arrest. And they know that can happen in the blink of an eye. And so if you're sitting on the curb, especially with your feet straight out and ankles crossed, that creates buffers to resistance. The person will have to uncross their ankles, bring their feet in, stand up, as opposed to if you're just standing next to them, and you could hit me right now. You know what I mean? And it's rare, but it happens. Like, a big training point that comes up throughout the academy is we train for what's possible, not what's probable. Okay? Every time you stop a car, the odds of someone shooting at you is very low, but it happens. The first department I worked for, the most recent officer that was killed, pulled over a car at night, didn't know who it was, vehicle code violation. Guy reaches out of the window, literally does a Hail Mary shot to the rear, hits the officer in the eye, kills him. You know what I mean? So that's what can happen on any car stop. Any domestic violence where you knock on that front door, those things can happen. So probably won't, but it's possible. And so we have to train for that, because also we're the last line. That's the thing. People don't realize most occupations, you can kick the can a little bit down the road. You can refer someone to someone else. When the police come in, that can't happen. It has to stop with you. You have to win, essentially. You know what I mean? And that's the mentality. So all the more reason why cautions are taken. And those can seem aggressive or abrasive or rough. That's part of the job.
And we can't not pull people over just because it's dark.
Right.
I mean, it's probably not logical.
Right. And I think a lot of people don't see the big picture. Like, for example, on Amazon Prime, I finished this thing called Falling for a Killer, and it's about Ted Bundy, the serial killer over the 70s.
Yeah, great movie.
Oh, it's fantastic. But people have this weird notion, I think, that when there's a really bad person out there, somehow they have a sign blinking on their car saying, "I am a terrible, terrible person," and the police see them and stop. No, a lot of these things start from just a basic detention or a basic car stop. We'll see with Ted Bundy, he was arrested several times because he kept escaping from jail. But one of the first ones, I think the first one he was arrested in, he was just driving around a college campus. It was night, kind of seemed suspicious the way he was moving. No major violations at all. Cop pulls him over, does an investigation. Long story short, ends up finding a ski mask, pantyhose with the eyes cut out, duct tape, crowbar, things like that. And, the things he was using to kill people, and they end up arresting him. Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, like a car stop shortly after the bombing where he was even let go, but they identified him, led to his arrest. So a lot of these very, very benign stops have a purpose as far as compiling information about who's where at what time that can be used in a very vital sense down the road. And I think people don't seem to understand that. I mean, I think people like to attribute bad intentions to the police all the time. And it's we all have a natural aversion to authority. You know what I mean?
Yeah, natural aversion to authority, but also the police may place judgment on people just the way the police are being judged as well. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah,
I mean, it would be difficult not to.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think police have to. I mean, it's part of the job is you have to be able to confront people, and that can be a very uncomfortable thing. But people got to realize the vast majority of the population are good, decent people, 100%. Not 100% of people, but they are completely good people. There are bad apples out there. There are the Ted Bundys. I mean, obviously he's an extreme example, but there are those folks out there. And oftentimes these folks are not just going to be like, "Oh, hey officer, here's my hands, handcuff me." And no, I mean, there is pushback, there's tension, whether it's passive, whether it's aggressive, whether it's verbal, whether it's physical, and police are trained and develop the experience on how to deal with that. And it has to be done, or else these people don't get put in check and removed from society like they're supposed to be. So, I think, unfortunately, I have a good friend and a coworker has a saying. He says, any profession for one thing, there's got to be racists in every profession if there's enough people. It's simply the law of big numbers. And there's roughly 800,000 police in this country. So I mean, there's going to be racists among that. I mean, I can tell you the backgrounding process is very extensive, like psychological testing, interviews, your personal history. They talk to every girl, in my case, girlfriend, every landlord, every roommate, every boss. I mean, they do everything they can to vet out the bad apples. But again, it's an imperfect process. Okay. So, so those exist, but it is a much smaller minority than people would like to think. So my friend says, okay, look, 1%, I'm just throwing that number out there, of cops are racist. The problem, though, is that 50% of cops are assholes. And so, and that could be, I'm not trying to be like anti-law enforcement or whatever, of course not, but there are a lot of, police that maybe the way they communicate with people is a little bit rough, and, I like to give the benefit of the doubt, to, not just to cops, but to people in general. I think it's just a better way to live. And you got to realize that officer may have just come from watching a child die. I've done that. That cop may have just found out that his friend got hurt in the line of duty and may never come back to work. Or he may have had a bad day off the job. Maybe he's in a rough divorce with his wife, and it's just like, you're going to lose the house. Like there's all these things, and those are not excuses. None of those are excuses for someone to be an asshole, but we're all imperfect beings. You know what I mean? And so we all have our baggage. And so sometimes we may not communicate in the best sense. Unfortunately, that, less than perfect communication can be extrapolated by people to think, oh, this guy is violent and aggressive or might kill me, or I could see him killing someone else. I mean, that's a bit of a leap. You know what I mean? The vast majority of cops never use deadly force. And that's where I encourage people to look at the data, the statistics, which is kept by the FBI, the DOJ, the CDC. I mean, there's plenty of stats readily available for free that show the extremely low likelihood of anyone being killed by the police. Extremely low. less than being struck by lightning.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, the problem is, and it gets back to what I was talking about, the media. That's the one of the four branches that is broken. That's the one that is selecting the information that people are given, and that is people's only source of information. You know what I mean? Like I personally, I shudder to think about what if I'd never gotten into law enforcement, and it's quite possible. It wasn't in the cards. I wasn't all my life dreaming about being a cop. I didn't have any family members that were cops. It was like I gave it a shot. And it was decent, and the recession also hit. And so I was like, oh, I have a decent job. I'm going to hold on to this job because all my friends are losing their jobs. But if I hadn't gotten into that, if I had gone down a different path, would I be also one of these people running my mouth about the police because I had no frame of reference for it? And when I was younger, I had a somewhat negative impression of the police, from being stopped, and I didn't enjoy it. Duh. At high school, I partied a lot. I'd go to house parties, and the cops would break up the parties. I remember I resented that. Looking back, thinking about, well, they're the adults who actually own this house.
Why don't you stop the real criminals, right?
Exactly.
So people say stuff like that, right?
Exactly.
And it's like, well, what you're doing is illegal. That's why we're here.
Right. And what you're doing, guaranteed, a non-cop called in, and you can't just say, oh, we're not going to go. Because that's how you get fired. You're not doing your job.
It's just a high school party. It's probably not that big of a deal.
Exactly.
Some underage drinking.
Right.
Nothing to worry about.
Yeah, they're just trashing this house while the parents are out of town. I'm pretty sure the parents probably want the cops to show up and do something, right? And so, it's it wasn't until I actually graduated from college and through where I was training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the Ralph Gracie Academy in San Francisco, but also I was doing some Olympic weightlifting, actually, not very good at it. But both places there were cops that I trained with, and they knew I was trying to figure out my life path. They educated me about it. And it was getting back to don't you have something better to do? Well, yeah, I learned about some of the legitimately evil people that they confronted and took off the streets, or the investigations that they did that really helped people who were victims. There are people that are victimized out there every day. They need help. And a lot of this current backlash, it seems like it is largely focused on the rights of the criminal or the rights of the suspect without taking into account the victim. And there's people that I've seen it time and time again that just, through bad luck or whatever, they get victimized. And that's where I find the most value is when you help someone that you're the only person who could have helped them,
From what we were talking to Casey Mitchell about this too, and obviously the things that are highlighted are going to be the things that are on people's minds.
Yes.
Like Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rashad Brooks, those are highlighted. Obviously, a majority of interactions that police have, they probably come out positively. They're out there. Most police are helping people, but I'm curious, you said that the media is spoon feeding people certain pieces of information. I've seen CNN do that countless times.
Yes.
When you look deeper into it, you're like, oh shit, this is actually what happened. And it's literally like they're lying to you. Now, do you know, or can you give us examples of, some high profile cases that we've all heard of that we may probably be misinterpreting because we don't have, or we haven't seen all of the information from a different perspective? Does anything come to mind where you're like, God, I see people talking about this all the time, posting about this all the time. If they just knew this.
Yeah.
Does anything come to your mind there?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just to use the most high profile events here and to touch on one thing you talk about, seeing CNN do this a lot. I'll say, I've said this before, that, I don't support rioting or the looting. The one building that I'm okay with getting burned down was the CNN building. You know what I mean? Because I've seen them lie, and also to the thing where I talked about, I shudder about how ignorant I might have been if I hadn't gotten into law enforcement. It wasn't until I got into law enforcement, and mind you, I was 26, so I was well into adulthood, that I really started to see, okay, the media is 100% lying about stuff. I saw them produce stories about cases that I was personally involved in, so I factually knew they are lying and misleading and cherry picking the info they give 100% based on sensationalism, what's going to get a reaction, what's going to get ratings. And so that opened my eyes. It took off the blinders, so to speak. And I wish people realized that more. So two things to address that. And there's a number of sources on the internet that talk about this, but for every single one of the high profile, controversial police killings of people, and these ones that are always highlighted are white officer, black suspect. There, for every single one of those, there is an equivalent officer who knows what ethnicity killing a white person in these exact same circumstances. None of those are in any media form aside from very low profile, very, you have to dig to get that information.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that right there clearly shows that the media is cherry picking and selectively giving stories. And then a specific example is the Rashad Brooks shooting. So, it came very shortly after George Floyd. And I remember, perusing social media or something. I saw a headline article from a major outlet, and it said, Atlanta police shoot man passed out in his car. That was the headline. And I thought, wow, I mean, how can that even be okay? There's no way for that to ever be okay. Literally a person who's passed out, it can't be shot by the police. Well, then I started seeing videos, and that is a lie. I mean, we can't call it a fib. We can't call it a fabrication. That is a pure lie. He was awake. The police had lawful reason to be there. He's blocking a freaking Wendy's drive-through, passed out in a motor vehicle, i.e. a deadly weapon. And they put him through the typical DUI process. They're about to put cuffs on him because he fails the DUI process. And what unfolds is what we know. I mean, he fights two cops, punches both of them in the face, takes one of their weapons, is unresponsive to a taser, tries to tase another one of them, all that stuff, and which the media hardly touched on at all. And I didn't realize that, because obviously I'm friends with a lot of folks in law enforcement, so very quickly a lot of times I will get sort of like the inside scoop on a lot of these things. Mm-hmm. But what made me realize how pervasive the media lies are and how effective they are is I was driving with a good friend, and a very, very smart, informed friend, and that topic came up. And through discussing it with her, I realized she thought that she saw the headline, didn't read into it, and just assumed, because a lot of people do assume the media is telling you the truth, and thought, wow, the police shot a guy who was passed out. And I say, oh, no, there's more to it. And she's like, really? I'm like, yeah. And she got very frustrated. Because she's like, well, I was given totally bogus info.
And she might have communicated that to 5 other people already, too.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. So, and that's the domino effect of social media, and how, Denzel Washington has a great clip where he gets interviewed by the media about something, and he kind of puts them in check, and he says, if you pay attention, you're misinformed. If you don't pay attention, you're uninformed, which is worse. And he puts it on them. He's like, you guys have a very big responsibility, don't you, to give people true information, to not misinform people. And it's true. I mean, it's like when I vote, for example, I don't fill out every aspect. There's sections that I just don't know, and I think we need to be comfortable with saying we don't know. And so I won't vote on something if I don't know, because I'm uninformed. But I'll inform myself about certain things, or I'll already know about certain things, and I will vote on those. So I think we need to know what we know, but also know what we don't know. And realize that the media is spinning everything that they give us. And unfortunately, there aren't very many good alternatives to that. Not many people are going to actually dig into FBI statistics, DOJ statistics, CDC statistics. They're not going to. A lot of these things are open source. A lot of court cases are public domain, but that's boring. You know what I mean? And that takes work to find that information. It's so much easier just to click on CNN or MSNBC, get a headline. Oh, wow, that's what happened. Wow, that's terrible. Next page, or back to Instagram. So, I mean, that's the climate we're in. And that's why I say I think the media is the linchpin in this whole thing. The media, and unfortunately, out of those 4 things I talked about, the media is the thing I'm least knowledgeable about. So I can't offer like a good solution to it. I'd hope that there's folks that do know the media, how that works, and can propose getting it to a much more honest and truthful and journalistic way than it is right now.
Where do you like to get your information? I know you mentioned DOJ, et cetera, but like if you were trying to search something up, for some viewer that's listening in, they're like, I want to find truthful information about some of this stuff. What would be your multiple sources of looking into, if you have any?
Well, and multiple is the key word there. So I'll Google a topic, and I'll read multiple things, and some things will come from quote unquote the right, some things will come from quote unquote the left, and it's hard to find what would be considered a really centrist or moderate thing, because I mean that's not going to be popular. People like to swing to the extremes, but if you look at least both, and then also read it with a scrutinizing eye, and when I talked about how I think the education system should be reformed to include like civics, another thing that I think should be included mandatory in all curriculums is a semester of statistics. So with my major, I had to take a semester of statistics in college, and you learn all about bias. You learn all about how studies are conducted. You learn all how to scrutinize those things. And any article in a magazine, a newspaper, on a website that talks about information is going to cite studies and research and things that are done. But a lot of those are very skewed, or a lot of the way they give the results are skewed. And so if you have a basic statistical knowledge, you can be a little more scrutinizing and knowledgeable about that and what potential biases are being incorporated to spin the story. So so I just go to multiple sources, and then I'll still look social media. I'll look on YouTube. I mean, if there is video of something, I mean that helps. But I think always have the open mind, and always have it goes back to when Socrates said, the wise man knows one thing is that he knows nothing. Realize that you're coming from knowing nothing, and that you're probably never going to know 100%, right? So you'll see a video, and it may just be a split second, or it may just be the last 10 seconds of a 10-minute incident. Just to constantly be aware of your own fallibility, and then think of your own life experiences, and then think of common sense. Like it's not common sense that a cop's going to be like, this person is doing nothing wrong, but I just want to shoot him. Like that is not common sense. Although people seem to like to think that that's the way it goes. More than likely, this is a cop who's gone through an extensive background process, an extensive academy, extensive field training, extensive street experience, more experience than most anybody else gets outside the job. They want to probably put food on the table for their family. They probably want to, catch bad guys and help good folks. And they probably don't want to shoot someone unless they absolutely have to. But those things happen. I mean, yeah.
I want to ask you one thing, because like growing up, I've had certain situations with police, and so have many other of like my friends that are also black, right? And those experiences lead us to having an inherent fear. I'm going to be perfectly honest. When I have a cop tailing me or driving behind me, I get very tense. I am fairly scared. But I know statistically, I don't have a reason to be. So what I want to ask you is this, because I know that you know the numbers. Can you talk to us about some of the actual numbers that are behind, like police shooting white individuals versus police shooting black individuals? Because, I mean, the statistics, if I was actually thinking in that way, I wouldn't be scared.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So can you talk to us about some of that and shed some light on that? Because the reason I'm asking this is because obviously if you go on Instagram right now, there are multiple pages dedicated to showing police brutality on everybody, not just black people, white people, on everybody. And that makes people scared.
Yes.
But like we said, there are bad apples. We shouldn't be as scared, even though there are problems. Like there should be some reform in terms of the way they deal with things, I think.
Yes.
But can you talk to us about some of those numbers?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mentioned earlier, there's roughly 800,000 police officers in the country. And so every year there's millions upon millions of contacts with the police. Okay. And I don't know the exact number there, but it's on the score of millions. Every year, roughly slightly lower than 1,000 people are killed in a police interaction. Okay. So right there, we're already at, well below 1%, way below 1%. The vast majority of those shootings involve a violent felony and involve an armed subject. So, I think about accountability all the time. I think of ownership, like what Jocko talks about. And it's like, okay, if we own our behaviors and we don't commit a violent felony and we don't have a weapon when a police contacts us, we're dramatically improving the odds in our favor. Now, people do highlight on the unarmed subject that gets killed by the police, which does happen. But unfortunately, some of those statistics don't account for every year a certain number of police are killed with their own weapon. So they're killed by an unarmed person who disarms them, takes their gun, and kills them with it. That still goes down as an unarmed person. And that person might end up then getting killed. And, So that's kind of a misnomer. But at the same time, also, that's also where common sense needs to come in, where people, the implication is that, oh, unarmed means not dangerous. Well, have you ever seen Mike Tyson? You know what I mean? Like, he'll kill you with a punch. He'll be unarmed. He will absolutely kill you. You know what I mean? I mean, even with the George Floyd thing, Chauvin, when he murdered him, there was no weapons involved. It was a knee to the neck. So essentially an unarmed man committed murder. Everybody realizes that, but they'll still think that unarmed means not dangerous. Again, just like every year, a certain number of cops are killed with their own weapons, a certain number of cops are killed with bare hands, whether it's strangling, beating, things like that. So unarmed does not mean not dangerous. So it's a complete just a fabrication. People think, oh, the cop killed an unarmed person. Now, the overwhelming majority of any of those shootings, whether unarmed or not, involve resisting arrest, involve noncompliance. And this gets back to the accountability, the ownership thing is like most people, and I know people from all walks of life, all races, all genders, all occupations or lack thereof. I mean, I've been on the job for 12 years. I've encountered a lot of people. Just about everybody understands don't fight with the police. Don't resist. You know what I mean? Like there is a court of law. There is a process to do that. I mean, police absolutely do not get carte blanche. I'll say this till I'm blue in the face. Nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop. For sure. And, we loathe those people. So like when we saw George Floyd, we were furious because it paints us all in a bad light. But, a lot of those incidents, even when it's a justified shooting, what predicates it is noncompliance by the person. And so, I'll tell you what, one thing before I got on the job, I'd always been a very physically inclined person. I've been in a number of physical altercations, both through training and not. And, I'll be honest, I thought, okay, I'm somewhat talented at that stuff. I'm not very talented at a bunch of other things. And knowing that there are some bad people out there, I thought there was going to be more people fighting with the police and stuff. I was shocked, honestly, when I came on the job, and even dealing with, hardcore gang members, with murderers, stuff like that, who they comply. And I was almost shocked by that. But it showed me how overwhelmingly known it is in every community to just comply. Don't run, don't fight. And that eliminates just a ton of pretty much every shooting, getting back to the numbers. I mean, we're talking 99% plus. So, but then do more statistical stuff. And this comes back to like knowing how statistics work. So people talk about, I think a black person is 2.5 times more likely to be shot than a white person. And so then when you look at percentage, I may be messing that up, but the percentage is skewed in that direction. However, when you look at shootings per encounter with the police, it changes it dramatically. And it becomes less biased. I mean, numerous studies have shown that there is, as far as police shootings, police use of deadly force, there is not a bias. One study was even done by Professor Roland Fryer at Harvard University. He did it after the Michael Brown shooting. He did it because he firmly believed there would be evidence of a racial bias in police shootings, and he was shocked to find out that there wasn't. And so, he published that study. It was in the New York Times. It was in the Washington Post. I mean, it was pretty widespread.
So the 2.5 times more likely, I'm curious because that is mentioned a lot.
Yeah.
So what's the error in our perception of that statistic?
Okay, so in this ties into a frustration I have too, is I think a lot of these issues that we're talking about, whether it's with arrests, use of force, crime, incarceration, is much more of a socioeconomic issue than a race issue. And what's frustrating about that is socioeconomics is, that by definition, it's a mutable characteristic as opposed to an immutable characteristic. We can enact policies, we can do things to try and help people socioeconomically. You can't, with the exception of Michael Jackson, we can't change our race, nor should we, you know what I mean? Like, and no disrespect to the king of pop, but, but it's obviously much more inflammatory and sensitive when things are framed in a racial perspective. And that gets back to the media. If the media talks about, oh, we need a war on poverty, well, that's boring, but if we talk about, oh, there's, racist homicide happening by our police, well, that's going to get a lot of clicks. And so, it statistically show that crime is higher in lower socioeconomic areas.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and largely due to systemic racism in the past, lower socioeconomic areas have a higher percentage of African Americans, Hispanic Americans, so on and so forth. Okay. Police are going to focus on areas where there is more crime rather than less. So they're going to be in those areas. So already the probability of having encounters with minorities is higher. And so then if we look at, say, a cop has 100 encounters with with black people and 100 encounters with white people, when we look at the shootings per encounter, it's even. If not more shootings of the white person than the black person. And so that's where I think that doesn't get shown, but it's useful.
I would imagine this is a case everywhere, but I don't know, and maybe you know. In places where there's just less money, where they're socially, economically challenged, there's probably more crime.
Yes.
Doesn't matter where you are in the world, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the reality, and I've interacted with a lot of people who have come to this country from other, more third world type countries, and they'll remark to me in private about what's going on, and they're just blown away. They're just like, well, these people have no idea. Yeah. I mean, like in my country, like, they
talked to a few people like that.
Yeah,
too.
they saw some, and I mean, this is not just any one particular ethnicity or race. This is across the board. Like I remember I was at the LA Fit Expo. I was actually recruiting there, and a gentleman came up to me, kind of strange dude, but really talking to me a lot. And he had immigrated here from Romania, and he came here when, I guess, there's a dictator there, Ceausescu, I guess, was the dictator there. Horrible guy. I mean, just genocide, all that stuff. And this guy, he's a white guy, he's Eastern European, but he was telling me about how horrible it was and how it's so much better here in America. And it bugged him when people were bad-mouthing America. Now, to be fair, no country is perfect. We are far from perfect. We, like I said, there's those 4 elements to this whole crisis, and all need lots of improvement. But we also need to, and it gets back to the perfect is the enemy of the good. There is no such thing as a perfect country. There never will be a perfect country. We need to strive for having a good country, or a more betterer country. And yeah, I mean, I lost my train of thought there a little bit, but yeah.
When you get on a scene and somebody is, let's say I'm upset because Andrew punched my puppy in the face.
I would never do that.
And I'm like, you got to arrest this guy.
He was looking at me weird.
The first thing you
I might do that.
The first thing you do that I would imagine is you're like, okay, well, what's knowable about the situation? So you start to think, is there other people I can talk to? Because Mark seems to be pretty charged up. Andrew's mad because he doesn't like Mark's dog or whatever, right? So you probably are kind of investigating a little bit and trying to learn more about the situation. Is that how it works?
Yes, absolutely. And that's one thing that I had no idea about until I got into the profession, and that I think it can frustrate bystanders or involved parties, is that a lot of things, they take longer. It can be a bit of a time drain, but part of that is slowing things down, reducing some of the emotional load, talking to all possible involved people. And that may take time of like knocking on some neighbors' doors. Oh, did you see anything? Finding, there may be a family member in the house that can lend some insight to an incident, but they're not just coming out and talking. You have to go seek that out. Asking dispatch to call back the person who called in, which, if I may, getting back to the, police encounter thing, a lot of police actions are based on members of the public calling in, and people can call in about anything. And crazy people do call in. Crazy calls come in. If you talk to any dispatcher who's worked long enough, she'll talk about, people call about aliens and, Godzilla's on the loose, just all that stuff. But, and to a degree, they can filter out what we actually go to. But a lot of times we will go to things where, and this gets back also what's possible, not probable, where we're this is almost certainly nothing, but it could be something. And unfortunately, what I've seen a lot of times is, say, people may have a greater tendency to call in on minorities. A certain person is behaving suspiciously on the street or in this car or something like that.
Yeah.
That's on the public. You know what I mean? The police are not generating that, but they have to respond to it per their job. And so I think that's what gets lost in the conversation too, is that there is racism, whether it's individual or systemic, in the general public. Not everybody. I mean, I genuinely believe that most people are not racist. I mean, and that's just to go on a tangent. One thing that bugs me is, so growing up, I grew up in a very diverse city. I had friends of all colors, all religions. You know, I was taught that racism, like, that's a bad thing. You know what I mean? If someone's I knew about the KKK, the skinheads, the neo-Nazis. Like, if someone's a racist, that meant something. You know what I mean? And I think about today's day and age, you think of the story like the boy who cried wolf. You know what I mean? I feel like that's happening. I feel like the term racism is getting watered down when people that I know are good people, not racist people, getting accused of racism. Not only does that offend them and insult them, but it weakens the word. We need to, you know what I mean? If we could come up with another word for it, you know, that'd be better. But, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it bugs me that, you know, we're taking something that should, I mean, we should all be, like, I don't understand the concept.
Nsima, you were talking about this the other day. It bugs you as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Like, it's like you said, it's being thrown out around for even the smallest of things.
Right.
If somebody, like, misspeaks about something, or if they say something and it sounds a little bit off, but their intentions are known, it's racist.
100%. And, you know, and that ties into some things I said here earlier in a conversation I've had before. Like, you know, this generation now more than any is so hypersensitive to things and the quote unquote microaggressions and things like that. And so in this conversation, I have used the term, referred to black people. I've also referred to African Americans. I still don't know. I used to think that I'm supposed to say African Americans.
Black.
Okay. Well, and I had a conversation with a good friend of mine that we went to college together, and she's black. And she checked me on that, and she said, no, call us black. We don't want to be called African American. But I've heard the opposite too. And I don't want to offend anybody. I am not racist, but in different contexts with different people, whichever one I choose, it could be considered a microaggression. And you know, it gets back to, I think I had a post about this recently. People need to consider the intent and the outcome of an action. So there's a number of people that I go to for all kinds of great information. One is Jonathan Haidt. He's a social psychologist, written a number of books, brilliant guy. And he's very moderate too. So he's not conservative, not liberal. He's very even keel. And he talks about the new morality that has come up under the current millennial and Generation Z generation that is purely outcome based. So throughout history, any action was assessed, the morality of an action was assessed on its intent and its outcome. So say if Mark, you and I are walking down the street and I accidentally trip, bump into you, you fall and you hit your head. Next scenario, we're walking down the street, I grab you, I throw you to the ground, you hit your head. Same exact injury, same exact action, completely different intent, completely different morality. But the intent, so like when I say, you know, black versus African American, I don't have a negative intent there. But if say I'm using one of those terms offends someone, they don't consider the intent or lack of intent. It's just the outcome. Just the fact that they are offended means that I am bad. And I think that's not fair.
Well, maybe it gets to be a little confusing too, because are we supposed to use brown? Are we supposed to use yellow? Like they sound derogatory.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because with Asian people, I mean, if you, to me, like that doesn't sound right. It doesn't.
No,
it doesn't. You know, even when I say black, I'm like I feel like
I feel
not
weird
super
too.
not super confident in
I've
saying
noticed
it.
that.
You know what I mean? I'm always like, you know.
Well,
Kind of like unsure of myself exactly, but I mean, we are referred to as white,
right?
You know,
even if we're jacked and tan.
That's right. Yeah, regardless
not
of
orange.
like, yeah, regardless of, or unless you're Jay Cutler on stage, he was pretty orange. Right?
Yeah. Well, and that gets to something that bugs me too. Is I'll talk to people about, and the media is really honing in on this, what I call the language of divisiveness. Okay, if you divide people and you create more and more of these us and them scenarios, it really gets people fired up. And I think there's something, we're tribalistic beings. You know, look at how we evolved. We evolved tens of thousands of years in hunter-gatherer societies of no more than 150 people. We're used to that. And we're used to thinking, okay, other tribe evil, our tribe good. So, and that's where sports comes out. You know what I mean? Oh, I love the Giants, but screw the A's. You know, I love the Niners, screw the Raiders. Like, we're very tribalistic, okay? And so we'll hone in on anything that hints at division and competition, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, perhaps the reason why we have political parties.
Exactly. And so I think there's no way we can completely erase that. Just like a good analogy is, people talk about, communism is taking the river of competition in humans and trying to reverse its direction. You can't do that. Humans will always be competitive. Capitalism, regulated capitalism, though, is setting up dams and streams and channeling that. So knowing that the competition will be there, but directing it in a better way. In the same way, I think we should do our best to eliminate the language of divisiveness. So like, I prefer to call myself a human. You know what I mean? Like, that's it. Now, on a driver's license or something where I have to give a description, I'll say I'm white, and sure, I'll say I'm male. And there's a benefit there. I mean, say if I go missing, and they're doing a grid search for me, I want them to look for a white male if they're going to find me. You know what I mean? But beyond that, and for competition, of course, I'm going to enroll in the male powerlifting competition or whatever. But beyond that, I'm a human. Why don't we all just stop with the color, stop with the gender, and just say, okay, I'm a human. Adult versus juvenile, that makes sense. But like, I don't know. It seems simple to me.
I'm not sure if anybody's seen the clip from Morgan Freeman that was.
I've seen it many times.
A couple of years old, I think, and he talks about like the way to stop kind of all the hate is just to stop talking about racism and stop specifically talking about like race. It's really, really interesting the way that he. Everyone should listen to that. Maybe we can put a link to it in the show notes or something like that. But I found that to be just useful in hearing that. You're like, yeah, let's kill the idea of really worrying about if someone's a different color than me.
Because it's a false division too. I mean, because if we look back further enough, I mean, we are all Homo sapiens. I mean, we all came from Africa. And like you said, there is no truly white people or truly black people. There's all these different shades, and so it seems arbitrary to, say, oh, white, black, brown, all that stuff. It's just we're dividing ourselves unnecessarily.
I agree with that. I totally agree with that sentiment. But I think the tough thing about that is currently everybody has their own experience that is affected by not just their socioeconomic status, but the color of their skin.
Yes.
A few weeks ago, we had a group meeting with a bunch of white guys and a bunch of black men. We were black professionals, there were white professionals there, and we were all talking about the George Floyd situation that happened, right? When we had one man, we had the white guy tell us what you believe happened. Or, tell us, no, it wasn't George Floyd, it was Ahmaud Arbery. We asked him to describe to us the situation. And he described the situation he didn't think about it, but he described it through the lens of the two men that were chasing him, through being a homeowner in that neighborhood. And then the black guy that described it through the lens of Ahmaud Arbery. So it's like when we look at a lot of these situations, it would be nice if we would just be a human race. But there are too many things that, for example, as a black man that I have experienced, that, for example, when we talked about it in that room, those white men had no idea what it was like.
Absolutely.
Like when C.T. Fletcher was on, he asked, how many of you have been pulled over fit in the description? I have, multiple times. Every single black man in that room raised their hand.
Right.
Not a single white man in that room raised their hand. And we know, like, in certain situations, it's a policeman doing their job. They're just policing. That's like, you fit the description, you fit the description.
Yeah.
But that's something that a lot of black men have an experience of.
Yeah.
Because we just fit a description for something, right? So I understand the sentiment, and it would be beautiful if we could all just be one loving human race with no division, right?
No, I see where you're going, for sure.
I do wonder though if you didn't interpret it as racism.
I'm not even saying I don't.
Maybe it didn't. Maybe it doesn't sit on you the same way.
Yeah, like that's the thing though. Like
I do understand how difficult that would be, though.
Even those situations, I don't interpret it as racism.
Right.
I'm on the same page as you are. I think racism, the term, is overused in a lot of situations. I don't interpret it as racism, but it's like, it is a different experience that, for example, we will have with each other that I might not have with you, which will inherently cause a division without me even wanting there to be a division currently.
Yeah.
Right, I agree with that.
Well, and I think that touches on how we have to be measured and when we think about a personal experience. And I say that because I had a couple of conversations with people where I was trying to talk about the police side of things, and I hate to say sides because it's not like we're against it, but you know what I'm saying. I don't really have a better word for it. And the person was like, "Well, you have no idea what it's like to be black." And I was like, "Well, you're right. I don't. I mean, but and that is important for us to take that into consideration, but to a degree. Like, because if we take that down to its logical conclusion, there's 350 million people in this country. There's literally 350 million different lived experiences.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So we can't, if we won't get anywhere if we just say, well, you don't know what it's like to be me. You don't know what it's like to be me. We have to have some commonality as far as looking at information, data, statistics, and stuff like that, and having some common sense and having some common humanity and morality and whatnot. So I think it's not one way or the other. But we have to be very measured when we do that.
And that's the problem. People aren't measured.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the goal is to, try to make it as irrelevant as possible. And when I say, don't talk about it, I don't mean I just mean that it's not relevant anymore. That this person is this color, this person's of this persuasion, and that would be a wonderful place to get to. But I think that what happened to George Floyd, I think if you notice the impact that it's having on the country, you're also may start to notice the impact it's having on the world.
Yes.
And I think it can be a positive impact. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful for that because it does bring the topic up. Everyone discusses it. People are very emotional about it, but we're talking about it over a long, extended period of time. And so people can try to be more rational about it. People can try to think of what are some ways that we can just have this be something of the past where it's just not. It's just not such a volatile topic where it's open, maybe intermingling schools. I know they've tried some of these things. They do some of these things from time to time. I don't propose that I have any answers at all. Yeah. I don't know anything about it really, but I just imagine my experiences with other races has always been good.
Mine too.
And I've been around other races my whole life, pretty much. There's certain areas that I lived in where there was mixed races, and there's certain areas that I lived later on where there really wasn't. But I had early interaction. I even had one of my aunts married a black man, so it was that. I was 13 or something like that. And I just remember he was Uncle Bill and he was my coolest uncle. He was fucking legit, So yeah. I wasn't oh shit, he's black. I didn't really think about it until I heard the other family members chatting about it. Oh, what's going to happen if she gets, and I was why is this why
is it even anything to think about?
Yeah. I was I was kind of confused. Cause I said, even earlier in my life, I was around some different races and it's not that I don't see color. I clearly I do. But I was just comfortable with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's same here. I guess part of my difficulty with some of this stuff is I grew up in a very diverse city with diverse friends, and even if you look at my romantic relationships, y'all know my ex. She's black. Lived together for years. I mean, I had a ex-girlfriend that was blonde. I had an ex-girlfriend that was Latina. I had an ex-girlfriend that was Hawaiian. I never cared about race, and that's not some people have preferences when it comes to romantic relationships, and I'm not going to disparage that. Yeah. But it just the concept of evaluating someone based on those things just never made sense to me. And one thing I wanted to touch on when you were talking about putting things in the past that I think is really relevant today, and you talked about seeing the long run as opposed to the short run. So one of these great sayings that I always use a lot is, see it as a marathon, not a sprint. You know what I mean? I think if we look at, human progress can be a slow one. You know what I mean? And we'll look back to, say, the 50s and 60s when there actually was legal segregation, and it was a terrible thing. I'd say anyone would agree we have come a long way since then.
Yeah. Right?
We haven't come all the way. We got a lot of work to do. But that's progress. And I think some of these riots and things going on is trying to, it's say, oh, I want to bench press 500 pounds. Right now I bench press, say, 300 pounds. They're trying to get that 500-pound bench press, tomorrow or yesterday. It's going to be hard work, and it no matter how many statues you tear down and how many buildings you burn, it won't happen that fast. Like I said, a nation of 350 million people, a world of 7 billion people, it's gonna be slow. And I think we need to embrace the long-term mentality. And when we think only in short term, we also do drastic, brash things, which unfortunately have killed a number of people, have burned down a number of poor people, small businesses. And when it comes to, when you talk about putting things in the past, I think about something where, like, Germany, okay? Obviously our country, we have a horrible past with racism. They've got a pretty horrible past too. But there's a reason why a lot of the concentration camps are still up there. It's a reminder. Okay, it's if those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. And that's where I have a problem with people just obliterating, statues of, previous slave owners, Robert E. Lee, things like that. We could move it to a museum, but we need to remember our history. How do we know if we're going if we don't know where we came from? And we need to remember the horrors of that time. Mm-hmm. If we try and erase history, we're doing everyone a disservice.
Yeah. I want to ask you this because you mentioned drastic measures, and we've talked about a bit the whole idea of defunding the police, which I don't agree with. But I'm also curious about, because you mentioned all the things that need to happen to improve police. You kind of just like listed all these things off, and we never really delved deep into any of them. But you talked about the stress of the job, and Mark has mentioned that he has a lot of friends that were police that they just see horrible stuff on a day-to-day basis. And it doesn't seem, at least from my point of view, not being a cop, not having any like interactions in that way, that they have enough resources in terms of dealing with that stress or off time of dealing with that stress. It seems that it's bad interaction that just yields a environment that makes them potentially, some of them, overly emotional or just jumpy. You know what I mean? So do you agree with that? And how do you think that needs to be fixed? Because it doesn't seem that taking away money is going to be the way to fix that situation.
100%. I'm very glad you brought that up because it ties into a lot of things. I do completely agree with you there. And so some people might not know this, but you're right. Any job we do will impact our psyche. And when your job is generally dealing with what you can say the dregs of society are, but also seeing tragic situations, day after day, year after year, it can wear on you. And some people don't know this, but police have a extremely high rate of suicide. Very high. It's very high, higher than just about any other profession. Incredibly high divorce rate too. Incredibly high alcoholism rate too. And it's unfortunately the suicide statistics, as high as they aren't as high as they should be, because when cops drink themselves to death, they don't count that as a suicide, but that accounts for a lot of deaths too. So that happens. And military and law enforcement have always been very closely tied. A lot of people go from military to law enforcement. A lot of folks I work with are former military, all branches, all specialized units, SEALs, Rangers, Berets, everyone, PJs, Force Recon, all that. And just want to give love everywhere. And so, in both those industries, there's the old school mentality of, okay, you do horrible things, see horrible things, and you bottle it up. You drown it, you drink some whiskey, forget about it. You sure as shit don't talk about it to people. You definitely don't go to a therapist about it. Oh man, that's weak. And then you get the problems that come up. And now we're finally learning, and I think the wars in the Middle East have done that a lot, where we've seen the PTSD, the suicides off the charts from that. And we're learning, God, we need to talk. We need to address mental health more aggressively. And so thankfully, my department, like many others, we have and I'm on the team. It's the CISM team, the Critical Incident Stress Management team. And so I'm also on what's called the Crisis Intervention team. And so both of them deal with mental health. The Crisis Intervention team deals with mental health in the public. So like if I'm able to go to a call of someone who's suicidal or having some kind of a mental breakdown, I will go to that call and get extra training and dealing with that. CISM is internal. It's dealing with officers, dispatchers, paramedics, firefighters. And I went to a multi-day training on that, techniques dealing with that. And to tie in with an earlier topic, it actually further encouraged me to do my steady state cardio, because they talked about how research has shown that cardio, roughly, up to, 2 hours a week or more. So, the 10-minute walks add up to that, 30 minutes 4 times a week adds up to that, helps you process the cortisol in your body. Cortisol is the main stress hormone, and studies have shown that police, their cortisol levels are all jacked up because they go up all the way high, and then they a lot of times live in that hypervigilant state because of all the things they've seen, and it's incredibly unhealthy. Cortisol contributes to adipose tissue in the belly. It's bad for the heart, it's bad for the mind, a lot of things, and so cardio is a way to process out that cortisol. So that addresses what you're talking about, how steps are being taken, but like I said before about racial progress, it's a slow thing. There's still people I work with that will shun the idea of going to a therapist or a counselor. And so it's going to take time to have that set in. And remind me of some of the earlier things you asked about in there.
It was obviously the
defunding.
Defunding.
Sorry. Yeah, and so with that, I think the shame there. So one thing I want to talk about is that I've actually experienced the defunding phenomenon. So the first department I worked for was in the city of San Jose. I got hired on in 2008. So that's right when the Great Recession was starting to kick in. And San Jose as a city got hit especially hard by the recession. And the mayor at the time was also very anti-union, anti-labor organization. So there was a mass layoff, mass budget cuts across the board of all government employees in that city. And I actually got laid off. It was temporary. I got reinstated 8 weeks later, but I was the first layoff, me and 65 other officers from San Jose PD in its history. The department was founded in 1850, never laid a single officer off, not through any world war, not through the Great Depression, but this Great Recession, and this is in 2010, I believe it was, they laid 66 of us off. And it was already an understaffed department. Guess what? Crime went up. Went up significantly. And now, and a lot of people started leaving. It was called the mass exodus, which eventually I was part of that exodus, and I left to another department too. But, the numbers dwindled. All the violent crimes, property crimes went up. Thankfully, I got reinstated 8 weeks later. Within 6 months, everyone was offered a spot back. Only about half took it. Some people just left the industry entirely. A lot of people went to other departments. So it got defunded, and it got bad. Our training was cut back. Because training comes out of a budget. So everyone talks about more training for officers. Well, guess what? If you defund, you got to think of priorities here too. So I've always thought that I think police or law enforcement should do a better job of educating the public of how they do their jobs. That's why I talk about, I think there should be a civics class in every school that talks about police interactions. The problem is that, we rely on tax dollars. If we're going to say take 3 people and have them be part of a special unit of public education on police, well, those 3 people could be on the streets. Those people could be going to robberies, rapes, molestations. You know what I mean? So how are we're going to prioritize that over the, and so that it's very hard. And training is one of the things that money gets taken away from earlier because it's not the vital service of going to a shooting, going to a stabbing. Okay, so if anything, it requires more funding. I had a friend post recently where he said, I think all police should the following, and he said at least be a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, at least be have some skill in striking, Muay Thai boxing, at least have a degree in criminal justice, at least be he even said be world level competitive in CrossFit. He said be on the level of Froning or so. You know what I mean? And there was a number of other things. He said if they ever turn their body cam off, they should be fired on the spot. These things like that. And bless his heart's in the right place, but he doesn't know at all what he's talking about. And so I looked at this whole list and I said, you're outlining the most difficult job on the planet with those requirements. Yeah. To literally find someone who is a skilled grappler, skilled striker, fully educated in criminal justice, in phenomenal CrossFit type shape, and all the other things added up to make it basically no one can meet that qualification. And if there are people that can meet that qualification, do you think they're going to do it at a cop's pay? No. Right? I mean, Rich Froning was making what, $250,000 for a competition. That's not counting sponsors, none of that stuff. Yeah. There's not a cop job in the world that pays that much. Yeah. And you're working a bunch more hours and in a bunch more danger than doing a CrossFit event. So, so that's just unrealistic. And there's further complications. People, everyone knows I have a wrestling background, so I've had friends say, dude, I think, all cops should be trained in wrestling, just like people say all cops should be trained in jiu-jitsu. And that's good, and ideally, yes, all cops would be, but the job is not all physical. I've worked with some cops that are not physically imposing in the slightest. But guess what? They are great evidence collectors. They're great at documenting crime scenes. They're great at interviewing children who have been the victims of crimes. They're great at so many other things that have nothing to do with fighting with people and engaging in violence. And these things are so important to the job too. So if we just select for any particular trait, it's going to be impossible. It's going to vastly limit the number of applicants we can get. Yeah. But at the bottom line, it's at least going to take no less funding, if not more funding. I mean, you train jiu-jitsu just by itself. That ain't cheap.
No.
You know what I mean? And so when I got laid off, actually, that's why I used to train at AKA. I stopped because I was like, I got to cut my expenses. Yeah. And if we're going to get, and as you know, blue belt level, I mean, this ain't McDojo. You know what I mean? You got to put hours and hours, years in. I mean, blue belt is legit, even if it's the first promotion. And when we're using tax dollars here, which is a sensitive topic, are we going to funnel that many tax dollars into that much training? Not to mention people getting hurt in the training, or people who just don't have a whole lot of physical ability. Mm-hmm. So I think it's people have some unrealistic expectations, and when they talk about defunding, they have that's beyond unrealistic.
You're a smart guy, you're a rational guy, you're very experienced at being a police officer, but you still can't talk your way out of every situation, right? Like sometimes
Right.
it just weird shit happens, and you've tried to communicate with whoever you're dealing with, and sometimes you would need the wrestling background or need the jiu-jitsu background. So the answer isn't also just only having more education. You need to kind of be well-rounded, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So there's two components there. So one thing, when people talk about whether it's the physical background, the educational background, things like that, basically the on-paper stuff, the resume. One thing that I've absolutely learned in my years on the job is that there is an X factor that you do not see on a resume. And I would say that probably has something to do with every job. I've worked with cops who not very educated, not very athletic. There's nothing on that resume that's going to stand out, but they just have that X factor. They know how to spot a crook. They know how to deal with a crook. They know how to help a victim. They know how to talk to people. They have that sixth sense. And if we're just so concerned about having these people having this great degree in criminal justice and this great training in grappling and this, that, and the other, we're going to lose some of those people. I mean, I've worked with cops who have law degrees from Ivy League schools. I've worked with cops who are in the Navy SEALs. I've worked with cops who were in the NFL, cops who were in Major League Baseball. There's a number of black belts in BJJ I train with, pro fighters who've become cops. I have not necessarily seen a correlation between those folks who were so superlative in certain aspects and the quality of them as an officer. That's not a detraction either. In my case, I'm super thankful for my background. I mean, my wrestling and my grappling has saved me in a number of situations. It's been a number of situations where I've been able to not use any of the tools on my belt that can do more damage and just use my hands, and it works out better. But I'm not going to expect everyone to do that. I had a conversation with someone about the Rashad Brooks shooting, and he's a great friend of mine. Y'all actually know him, but he was like, Andrew, I don't think you would have shot him. He just said that, and I'm like, because I had already been explaining to him the legality of the shoot and the justification for it, and his rationale was like, well, with your background, he wouldn't have been able to get away. You would have won the physical altercation at first. And I'm like, well, I would bet that I could if I can't say 100%, but are we going to expect every cop to have a Division I wrestling background and to be 250 and somewhat strong and be purple belt level in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? No, and that's not saying I'm anything special, but I mean, there's Anthony Smith, the light heavyweight MMA fighter. Mm-hmm. He fought John Jones to a decision. Okay, so John Jones, a lot of people would say the toughest dude on the planet. I'd say that. And there's a lot of them, but I mean, he is on a completely another planet. Anthony Smith fights to a decision with him. He goes 25 minutes with the toughest dude on the planet. Anthony Smith had an intruder in his house a few months ago, and he talked about it, and you can Google it. He confronted this guy and fought with him. And Anthony Smith talks about how difficult that fight was. He was like, I gave this guy every punch, every knee, every elbow. He kept coming. And people don't realize, so you got one of the best fighters on the planet. This guy will beat any cop's ass, and when you have a motivated enough, crazy enough, or intoxicated enough guy, especially when it comes to meth or PCP, even for the best fighter in the world, that can be a struggle. And then if you throw a weapon into it, whole nother game. So that's where I think, the training is helpful, but it's not everything. You know what I mean? And
Yeah, it's like you wouldn't be that confident if you're like, oh, I'm going to this call with Mark, and Mark, he's really great at talking his way out of the situation. So I think we're gonna be able to get out of this one. You would rather that I could do both.
Exactly.
I could assist you physically if I needed to, and assist mentally, or if you went with me and you're like, oh great, I'm going with Mark, he's always so freaking aggressive. Right. All he ever uses is his boxing background. He's gonna like come over and deck the guy while I'm trying to have a conversation with somebody.
Yeah, I mean, ideally every officer is a Renaissance person. You're in good physical shape, good grappling background, good striking background, good at talking, good at de-escalation, good with the gun, good with every force option on their belt, good at collecting evidence, good at report writing. I mean, there's the whole spectrum of facets of the thing, but I mean, it's the likelihood of finding someone that meets all those is just so low. That's
right.
Just being humans.
And I just wanted to show the clip because when you're saying somebody stepped up to Anthony Smith, you're probably thinking,
This dude.
it's probably a monster. And you look at this guy and he looks crazy as shit, but
Yep.
he doesn't look too he looks like maybe me in a hoodie, it doesn't look too bad. So for this guy to be able to do that to Anthony Smith, it's like, well, shit, man.
Yep.
That just, kind of cements your opinion.
Was that
on that.
after the fight?
That was right before.
So yeah, this guy tried to break into multiple houses, I guess, before he broke into Anthony's. Anthony left the garage door open by accident, so that was
What a unfortunate person to intrude upon.
Yeah. I think, just a real quick, one thing that people don't understand is how fast some things occur too, is, a lot of people, the word de-escalation gets thrown around a lot. And we've been trained in de-escalation for years. It's not a new concept to law enforcement, contrary to what the public would believe. But the problem is that a lot of times, and like you addressed, it doesn't work, or there is simply not the time for it. Like I've literally, I remember a domestic violence call I was on years ago, and it sounded like, a woman's getting beat up by her husband or her man, and so I show up and I'm by myself. I don't have what's called my fill there yet, but I go right up to the door, knock on the door swings open, the dude's flying out towards me from the door. And did I have time to talk him down? No. And thankfully I was able to throw him on the ground, and I still remember it, and thankfully I speak Spanish, so they were Spanish speaking, and I was able to tell another person walking by, I said, stay right here, watch me, and watch that I'm not going to hurt this guy. And I was able to, take him into custody and deal with it. And the woman's inside all beat up and screaming. And, but de-escalation is not going to work in that. There's a lot of cases where that's the way it is.
I'm curious too about this, like when shootings are shown, like I don't know his name, but I saw like an article and people were making art of him. There's this young black kid that was shot recently. Like he seemed like he maybe had some mental issues potentially, not when it happened, but like he played violin for cats. I don't know if you've heard about it, but he was also recently shot by police. And as these stories keep coming up, because the fact is these things will happen, we're hoping ideally, since cops have such a dangerous job, we'd hope that it never happens, but it will happen. Right. How do you see that officers can potentially weed out these types of individuals? Because you also kind of touched on that. There needs to be a better way to do that.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, there's training, but there's also accountability on that end for officers to be able to see that this person isn't fit to handle this. I know you can't tell the future, you can't tell what somebody's going to do, but there are probably signs. Like Chauvin had all those marks, like 18 or 19 derogatory marks showing that he's had bad interactions. So he shouldn't even have been there potentially.
Right.
So do you think that things can be improved there so that we can get rid of these few people that are causing all of the trouble?
Yeah. I think one that I talked about earlier, I think everyone should have body cams. That's across the board. And honestly, I love having a body cam. That's the thing, is I think a lot of people thought, cops are going to hate body cams because it's going to show how crooked they are. Nuh-uh. Like I have friends who work in internal affairs, who receive all the complaints from the public, and they love body cams because it shows unequivocally that most of these complaints are BS. They're lies or they're fabricated, and they don't stand up to scrutiny and with video, audio evidence. Okay. Also, it helps me remember things. I used to always have to have index cards in my pocket and I'd write down all this stuff. Now I can just look at the footage and get the perfect recollection when I'm writing my report. So body cams across the board got to be there. Now, those are fallible machines. So like getting back to when my friend, he posted, anytime a cop turns off a body cam, instant firing. Well, here's the problem. I've been in altercations where I've seen body cams get knocked off. They're not totally secured on there. Also, it's a big button, and the reason for that is because under stress, you don't want a fine motor skill to turn something on. You want to just be able to turn it on. Problem is, and it can also turn off in a struggle. So they're very and even the angle is imperfect. They haven't found a perfect angle for it. Usually it's mounted on the chest. Well, look, if I'm drawing my weapon, I'm blocking a lot of the footage of the camera. So these are all things that have nothing to do with the cop having malicious intent. They're just logistical aspects that cover that up.
I'm curious, how long can one record for?
Oh, hours. Yeah.
Okay.
So the way the cameras that I use and that I'm familiar with they have what's called a 30-second buffer. And that's also really good. So say when I turn it on, it already has captured the previous 30 seconds in video, but not audio. So that's when you see body cam footage of shootings, it'll be quiet for the first 30-ish seconds and then you'll start hearing it. But once it starts going, I mean, I've had hours long footage.
And then do you you get back to your department and you just start uploading it, or how does that work?
Yeah. So there's what's called a dock, which is, and we have lots of those radio batteries, radios go in these things, and it's all chargers, but it's also uploaders. And so you just plug it in, it charges it while it uploads it to the general system, and you can access it on all the computers.
And how long does footage stay on the the cloud or whatever it may be?
Yeah, the database, it's at least a year. I mean, and you get notified when things are about to purge, so you can take measures to preserve it. But because the vast majority of things that get filmed, like at this point now, we have to turn it on for every contact. And so the vast majority of those are completely inconsequential. And so that should get purged and not take up space.
I think an interesting thing here is that what happened with George Floyd is so irrational, and also I realize it's also not an isolated incident. I realize that these things have happened before, but this one in particular has really kicked everything up and made people talk about it, which I think is a positive thing in the long run. The interesting thing is that the very thing that kicked up all this kind of auditing of police officers, precincts, just how we handle all these situations is probably a situation that there's not a solution for at all. Like what happened to George Floyd, I think because it doesn't make any sense. It's irrational what one human being did to another human being, just because of their power, because of the badge that they have. I can't think of a solution to it. I do understand people say, "Oh, you got to weed them out better," but there's good processes involved in that. And I'm sure with yourself, I'm sure a lot of times being a police officer is a giant pain in the ass. Anytime you make a wrong move, you probably get in trouble, you get penalized. And those things, and we could look at it and certainly say, okay, well, he had a lot of strikes against him. Let's pay attention to more of that, so this kind of thing is less frequent.
Yeah.
But again, I just think it's such a shit situation. I don't know if there's an actual solution to that problem itself.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it is true. And there's a saying that's policing is people talk about, there's bad cashiers in grocery stores, there's bad taxi drivers, every profession has bad people. And so people say, well, policing is the one profession where that can't happen. And I get that, but that is overly idealistic by definition. Yeah. Getting back to the 800,000-ish officers, there is no way to not have a Chauvin in that group. And it's terribly unfortunate. But I think about active shooters, a very hot button topic. We can do everything we can to regulate firearms, put officers in schools, do that stuff. There will still be active shooters. That's part of reality. Is there bad things will happen, bad people exist.
There'll be a Ted Bundy, there'll be a serial killer, there'll be
exactly.
And there's not I cannot think of a solution to some of those issues, you know?
Right. And one thing I do want to touch on is that I see people post and talk about, well, the police never get in trouble. No, you just don't know about it. I've actually arrested a cop before, and I've seen it happen. I've seen guys either get fired or suspended or arrested. I've seen the gamut of those things happen, and it just doesn't get publicized. You know what I mean? Right now, I can think of several cops that are in prison, you know, from the departments I've been at. Like, it happens. It's just they're not just advertising it willy-nilly.
Where are the police weak, in your opinion, from what you've seen over the years? Where, like you talked about, you know, breaking world records in powerlifting and how you attacked the weaknesses. What are some of the weaknesses that you think, you know, that could be improved upon?
Okay. I think, okay, a lot of this comes down to staffing. And what I mean by that, and that's one of the unfortunate side effects of the current crisis, is that it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, or even a vicious cycle of self-fulfilling in a worse way. So basically, when it's vilifying police, and it's making it less and less people want to become police. I mean, even more, less and less good people, because a lot of people, even like I said, I came out of college, I didn't think about being a cop, and if I came out in this day and age, I might be like, oh heck no, I'm not going to do that. And so you're going to get more and more of the people who do it just because it's maybe the only place they can get hired, or the only way they can make some money. And you want someone with a little bit more intrinsic motivation, or good motivation, than just paying the bills. And so, and those wheels were already in motion. Like, with the last decade or so of incidents where the police get kind of vilified and painted in a bad light, plus, you know, the economy had picked up, and typically government jobs in general do better in poor economies because it's seen as a stability issue, and you're never going to get rich off of it. In a good economy, people see, just like I said, the recession happened when I got hired, and it didn't force me, but encouraged me to stay put, as opposed to in a boom, people are thinking about how to be an entrepreneur, how to get into private industry and really make it big. Okay, so we were already having staffing problems on top of that. And this gets to where I think an improvement can be made. Law enforcement in general is a more conservative profession as far as I don't mean politically, but I mean mentally, resistant to change. And so, for example, when I was at San Jose, we had shotguns in our cars. We issued shotguns. And I remember talking to the old timers, and they talked about how, you know, before that came to be, there was a lot of resistance. They were like, we want to put shotguns in your cars. And the guys were like, no. Well, then that evolved to where a number of departments have AR-15s, have carbines. In my current department, we have that, which is a much better weapon.
What's the shotgun for? Or what was it for?
So the shotgun, just like the AR-15, so it's the long gun, it's a rifle, and it's
for have extra backup.
Yeah, so certain situations, like, so say if there's an active shooter, for example, you're going to want to have that because you know, I've seen people get shot with handguns, and they keep going. If you get hit with a slug gun, that's much more likely to put you down. And with the AR-15 especially, you have more distance, and it's more likely to pierce body armor than a handgun round. So there's those purposes, and if someone's barricaded and you want to be able to penetrate more layers, that kind of stuff is where, or a more precise shot. Any long gun is going to have much greater accuracy than a handgun. So those are all the reasons there, but some departments hesitated to get AR-15s, and that's because of the perception that they were too, quote unquote, militaristic looking. Even though if we're talking about practicality, it's a far better weapon, but it's the perception thing. And so there's this resistance to change. And so what I'm getting at is, in the hiring process, I would say it's somewhat antiquated, so the first thing you do once you apply is you do a PHQ, which is a personal history questionnaire. And it's all about, you know, previous, you ever been arrested before, you ever done this, ever done that. And a lot of people, and I remember seeing it when I took it because I was in a big auditorium, get weeded out right then and there. They did this, they did that, they put it on the PHQ, they look at it, oh, you're gone. And I think that was overly strict. And I think, especially in this day and age, I think kids these days are doing more, exposed to more, and experiencing more than they were, say, 50 years ago when these PHQs were being written. I mean, case in point, you know, like, cannabis is legal now in California. You know what I mean? So I would venture to bet that more people are exposed to it. And cannabis is not like an automatic DQ, but a certain amount of it, or a certain degree of it being recent enough is. Like I still remember when.
So someone maybe just being honest, it could just work against them. They could say, I played video games a lot when I was a kid and I smoked a ton of pot. And they could be kicked out of there.
Absolutely. I still remember when I started in July of 2008. And so I was in the application process all for the 6 months prior to that. And so I remember New Year's of 2007, I was, hanging out at a friend's place and there was like a few people all over the side that were smoking weed. I didn't think anything really of it, but I remembered it. And I remember in my background investigation, they said, when was the last time you were in the presence of people smoking weed? And I was like, oh yeah, New Year's. And they're like, really? And they like honed in on that. And that's what really opened my eyes to like, holy crap, like they're really strict about this. And, in my opinion, that's BS, and I was honest and everything like that. But it's like, if you're going to scrutinize that, you're probably going to eliminate. And I've seen decent people get eliminated from the process for things that I think are BS, just like people make it through the process that shouldn't have made it through. So I think, and the PHQ is just the very beginning. You do like the psychological written test. It's like 4 hours long. It's hundreds and hundreds of questions that you fill out to evaluate your personality based on the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Indicator Test or something like that. You also get interviewed by a psychologist. And your whole background, I mean, they literally look at any websites you've been to, obviously any social media. They'll talk to, all your exes, all your family. I mean, they talk to everybody. So it's very extensive. And then you do a polygraph examination, where they call it a lie detector, polygraph examination. They ask you all these questions. And I think people have failed those just because they get nervous or anxious. You know what I mean? Like, I think the polygraph, in my opinion, just my opinion, it's a racket. Because a lot of people retire from law enforcement, set up a polygraph business, and just get funneled applicants through their previous employer.
Wow.
There's a reason polygraphs are not admissible in a court of law. They haven't been shown to be reliable. Also, who does great on polygraph tests? Sociopaths. Who you don't want to be? Cops? Sociopaths. So that's where, I think that's one example of a terribly antiquated thing that eliminates decent people and even lets pass not so good people. So I think if we amend the entire process to open it up to some people, but hone in a little bit more on other characteristics, I think that's where there could be a benefit to staffing.
Wow. Cool.
Something I heard you bring up on another podcast, we'll kind of close it out because we've been chatting for a long time, but something I heard you bring up on another podcast, and I think it might have been related maybe to COVID-19. I can't remember exactly, but you brought up the fact that Abraham Lincoln had a group of people where they would have a lot of conjecture and they would, share a lot of different ideas and then they would figure out a way to proceed forward. You just mentioned it real quickly, and I never heard of it before, but I do find it really interesting, and it's something I mentioned on my social media as, like, America has some really, really intelligent people. And we think of like, we might have a shortage of masks, or it might take a long time to get those resources. I just think to myself, well, it doesn't seem like Jeff Bezos has any problem getting stuff quickly and getting things out to people fast and things of that nature. And I'm like, Elon Musk seems like he's pretty damn intelligent, and he seems like he's forward thinking. Why not get a Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk? Obviously, you would need other people in there as well, like infectious disease people that know about coronaviruses and people that have had a history of studying these things. But why not use our resources? Why not get people together and say, hey, like, let's just really be open. Let's start spitballing some ideas. How do we help the damn public? And when I proposed that, people were like, "You're an idiot! Like, stick to lifting weights." And I was just thinking, look, I don't think it would hurt.
Yeah.
And I think even Joe Rogan has kind of proposed, just kind of spitballing some stuff on his own podcast, saying, "Hey, what if we had, rather than just having a single president, maybe there's 4 or 5 people that are in charge."
Yeah.
Something along those lines. When it comes to the COVID-19 situation, it's very confusing because not no one was an expert on it when
Yeah.
it, and still, there's still a lot of different information. Right now we're seeing like a quote unquote spike, but it's always been there. People have it. People have had it already. Millions of people have had it. Millions of people will get it. Most Americans will probably get it. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but that's just my own opinion that most people will get it. What do you think are some things that can be done to assist people, through this time? It does seem like a very low percentage of people, end up getting sick enough to where they die from it. But what are some of your thoughts?
So, okay, and if I may use that in a law enforcement, applying it to that. So the Lincoln part, I'm really glad you brought that up. So Abraham Lincoln has been a hero of mine from a very young age. And a lot of people don't know this. He was actually a county wrestling champion when he was younger. Yeah, he was. Wow. Another very
I
cool.
think he's the tallest president ever, right? Like
Yeah.
6'4" or 5", right?
Yeah, I think he may have had what's called like Marfan syndrome, which is where he had really big hands and excessively tall. It's kind of it's a disorder. But yeah, also he had crippling depression. A lot of people don't know that he had a major depression. And actually, like when I was younger, in like adolescence and going through some hard times, like my dad printed out an article called, I think it was called "The Saddest Man in the World Saved a Nation," and it was about Abraham Lincoln, where he wrote a letter, I think, to his wife, where he talked about himself as being the saddest man in the world, and he was
Damn.
very depressed, but as we know, he did some amazing things for the country. And so I've always held him as a hero in those regards. And but yeah, the book is called Team of Rivals, and it's where he's the president in the middle of the Civil War, where the country's literally falling apart, people are killing each other, and he realizes we need differing opinions. We need a group. We don't need an echo chamber. We don't need groupthink. We need good minds of all varieties to come together, and that's where he shows a cabinet of a lot of different people like that. And so to address that in law enforcement, one thing, so I recently finished a 5-year stint working as a detective in my department. And so as a detective, you use a lot more databases, a lot more technology. And I had known this beforehand too, but it's a running joke. I'm in Silicon Valley. Well, constantly our printers will jam. Like our printers won't even work. We'll be like, we're in the capital of Silicon Valley and our technology sucks. And it's depressing. I mean, like one of our main databases for criminal justice information, I mean, it literally looks like you're playing, what was it, Pong, or it's like SWAT. You remember like the Apple IIe's from decades ago? It's ludicrous. The technology is decades and decades behind. There's these things called, so fingerprints obviously are a big issue, and a lot of times we rely on that to identify people, because sometimes people won't give a name, they'll lie. But their fingerprint may show they have a warrant, or there's something important about this person you need to know. And there's been times when some people have what's called a mobile ID unit. It's a unit that can run a fingerprint and be brought out to the scene, because you don't want to bring them into the station and run their fingerprints, because that's overly invasive. Well, sometimes those don't work. Sometimes they're not available. Meanwhile, if I go to 24-hour fitness, I put my finger on a scanner with thousands of other people, and it scans me in and identifies me. It's just depressing when a commercial gym has better technology, widespread, than selectively a police department has. And it's all the databases. A lot of them, they freeze. I mean, there's nothing. I always think about Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. If we just got them and some of these great tech minds to just like evaluate the technology that law enforcement has, it would massively make the system more efficient.
Yeah, can't somebody say, hey, like, we need some help over here? The government, can't they just kind of wave a flag and say, hey, we need some assistance?
Yeah, that'd be nice. That would be nice.
Because it seems like those guys have it figured out pretty good.
Yeah. But with the coronavirus thing, I mean, I think we have, as humans, we have a difficulty with uncertainty. You know what I mean? And the coronavirus is a massive uncertainty. And I think a lot of people forget the way science works. And people, Fauci or whoever says one thing in March, and then he says something different in April. And people say, oh, see, he was lying in March, or blah, blah, blah. Well, no, it's more research has given more information, and hence he has amended his opinion. You know what I mean? Based on the additional information. And that's how science works. Like, science never ends. Science is constantly trying to disprove its current theory for a better theory. So I think people love to paint things with malicious or negative intent when it's not there, but it makes a better story.
Do you think other departments should kind of follow suit with what you guys do, since you are multifaceted rather than just kind of one thing? And maybe we could have something other than like just police officers. Maybe it's even given a different title or just looked at in a different way. Like, oh, those are the people that help us because they help you in a fire. They help you, if you're choking on food, or they help you, if you have a complaint about somebody or whatever it might be.
So, yeah, first of all, to head off, because there already are some articles in the media about my department, and it talks about how the city I work for doesn't have a police department and never had. And it's a huge misnomer that bugs me and a lot of my coworkers, because it absolutely is a police department. Everyone's gone through a police academy. We wear a badge. We have powers of arrest and all that stuff. It's simply a combined police department with a fire department.
It's just called something different.
With EMT. But we even still, like, I still have when I was in the detective, a vest I would throw on for like search warrants and operations. It says police on the back. I mean, we still identify ourselves as police. So I think there's pros and cons. Honestly, it saves budget-wise. It saves the city a lot of money, basically because our fire side is understaffed compared to a city of the same size. Because
so you still have a fire department.
Exactly. Yeah. So when I worked in fire, and so it's the same as any other fire department. We're in a station. We drive an engine. We get dispatched to calls within our area. And that's where the rubber really hits the road is on the police side. So on the police side, in addition to all the police gear, you also have your fire turnouts in the trunk of your car, and you have a medical bag. So you'll get dispatched to certain medical calls. You also get dispatched to fires, and you literally show up, take off all your outfits. So that's where you really hope you're jacked and tan for that, because the public's all coming out and watching. And then you throw on your turnouts. And then you go. And by that time, the engine has showed up. You meet up with the engine. You got a incident commander comes out and gives you an assignment to deal with the fire. And so it's good. It saves the city a lot of money. It's also good that it gives people other opportunities. And this gets to a lot of the conversation is that even the most like true blue cops type people, I've seen it time and time again, they get burnt out on the job. It's just, it wears on them. It wears on their mind. It wears on their heart. And so I've seen some of these guys, I mean, these are badass folks, go to fire, and it kind of rejuvenates them. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, wow, people are being nice to me. And,
they get to shift gears. I get you.
Yeah, I'm sitting in a recliner. I mean, we honestly call it, and this is not to disparage firefighters, but it's called, some people call it going on vacation when you work on the fire side. I mean,
that sounds derogatory.
It is derogatory, but unambiguously, I mean, very few people actually do both jobs, and I and 100% of the people I work with can unambiguously say that the fire side is easier than the police side. I mean, any way you cut it.
Well, dealing with fire is different than dealing with human and behavior.
Right. And in addition to that, fires are more and more in metropolitan areas more rare. We have sprinkler systems, code enforcement, different building materials, fire extinguishers, all these things so in the time that I worked in fire, it was very few actual fires I went to. It was mostly medical calls. And again, those are more simple than crime type calls, less moving parts. So it is nice to have that option to do both. The public, I'll tell you, largely doesn't realize it. Like even in the city I work, a lot of people don't know that it is both. They're surprised to see that. So it's, whether it could be advertised more, I don't know. But it's hard to get applicants.
Any idea how it came to be?
Well, so it's something I actually learned fairly recently is that I guess back in the day, and I'm talking like pre-1950, more and more areas did actually have folks that did both police and fire outside of the major cities. And so like where I live in Silicon Valley, back then it was mostly farmlands and orchards. It wasn't until like the 70s when the tech industries came in that it expanded into a metropolitan area. And so I think my city was kind of just the one that decided, hey, we'll just keep it this way. Whereas a lot of other places said, okay, we need to start specializing. And it's just been that way ever since. And, but some of the drawbacks are finding applicants. Like, cause I remember when I left the big city department I worked for in San Jose and came to where I'm at, I talked to some of my buddies there and I was like, hey dude, come over. We're still hiring. And they're like, oh, you gotta be a firefighter though. You know what I mean? And then there's a lot of people who want to be firefighters, but when you tell them, oh, you also gotta be a cop, They don't like that. So to find people who are, one, willing, and two, able to do both things, because there are definitely differences there as far as personality and as far as abilities, it's harder to get that staffing.
But when you do find somebody, they're probably pretty damn good.
Yeah, no, and
Right.
I can say absolutely. Yeah, a lot of the folks I work with, I'm constantly impressed with their ability to do both. I mean, it's yeah, no, I mean, there's some great people out there, and we just need more. And and everyone retires eventually, so we need to replace them, and it's hard. So, and then there's also a lot of training too. I mean, and training is expensive. So, like, I've gone through a full fire academy and a full police academy and full EMT certification, and every year I have ongoing training in all three of those that I have to keep up to keep all my certs relevant. So, that's not cheap. That doesn't grow on a tree. That has to be paid for. So, that's just an issue that can get in the way. But I think it has promise. You know what I mean? But I think people got to remember, though, that, like we talked about earlier, there are those incidents where bad people out there, or even good people, but in a bad moment, it's that rough measures need to be taken to deal with them 100%. And that's when people talk about, defunding the police, we'll use social workers and counselors and stuff like that instead. No disrespect at all towards those folks, but I know, because I've been sent on these calls, where a social worker is calling for help because the person's out of control. Counselors calling for help because the person's being violent. I mean, it's not like those folks don't exist, and we collaborate with them. It's called a joint response. A lot of times we'll incorporate multiple facets to deal with a case, but there's a lot of times when it simply has to be a police officer doing it,
Yeah.
Anything else? Good to go?
No, man, that was amazing, man. Thank you so much for sharing all that insight. It's just really cool having, this other point of view. Like, I know anyone on the live stream, tomorrow's episode is going to be really good from our boy Ryan Tillman. But, like, again, when we're talking about certain things, we're like, well, why can't cops just do this? Or they need, jujitsu, they need this. And you're just like, well, shit, man. Like, even if we did have unlimited time and budget, that's still not going to be the answer for every single situation. So the way you laid everything out, it's just extremely helpful when it comes to, like, why there's so much pushback on either side.
Yeah. Well, and that reminds me also of some of the unrealistic expectations people can have. I mean, even at the highest level. So Joe Biden, who's running for president, made the statement recently about why couldn't they just shoot him in the leg? And what that shows is that he has zero firearms combat experience or training. Because no department ever trains that, and there's a reason. They always train to shoot center mass. And so when literally the person who might be the next president of the United States, and I'm not trying to get political, but I will say that, I mean, that is a completely uninformed, if not misinformed statement. But I've heard people say that. And I think people need to realize their limitations of what they know. Most people have never trained with a gun, much less a gun shooting a moving target in a combat situation. So they should maybe defer to the folks who have done that when it comes to making those decisions.
Could shoot somebody in the hamstring if they had well-developed hamstrings. They're big enough. If they had big enough calves, you could probably pop them in the calf.
Oh, dang.
But if they weren't working out, then maybe it would be a lot harder. They didn't have the genetics to have big calves.
Hey, now.
Andrew, take us on out of here, buddy.
All righty. Thank you, everybody, for checking out today's episode. Sincerely appreciate your time, Herbie. Like I said, that was very impactful, so thank you so much. If you guys got some value out of today's episode, please share it with a friend. There's definitely somebody that needs to hear everything that was told or said on today's podcast. Please make sure you're following the podcast at Mark Bell's Power Project on Instagram, at MB Power Project on TikTok and Twitter. My Instagram is at I am Andrew Z. And Nsima, where are you at?
Nsima Inyang on Instagram and YouTube, at Nsima Inyang on TikTok and Twitter. Sir, Herb.
Herbie the Love Bug on Instagram, which is Herbietheluvbug. So it's Herbie the Love Bug, but the love is spelled LUV. No spaces, nothing else.
Just finishing up here, tell us about the carpal tunnel thing. What was the deal with that? Because they went through your hands? They did surgery through your hands?
Yeah, so, I mean, and this could hopefully be helpful for some people. So starting about 2 years ago, I started noticing my hands were going numb at various times, and pain, the feeling of when your hand goes to sleep, like if you sit on it or something.
Yeah.
But it would happen, when I was driving, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and couldn't feel my hands. And so long story short, a neurologist ran tests and diagnosed it as carpal tunnel syndrome. So which means the nerve that channels to most of the fingers gets blocked somewhat. And so the treatment for that is, and I had it severe enough that it had to have surgery. They drill into the base of your palm and kind of free up the tissue that is blocking the nerve pathway. So, It's pretty invasive. I mean, it's 8 weeks later. I still have like pain there, like as far as putting pressure on my palm. But
That was only 8 weeks ago.
yeah,
And feeling pretty good though.
feeling pretty good. Yeah. And actually haven't had any numbness in my hands ever since. you know,
Forearms
so-
are still jacked.
Oh yeah, well you know how to do that, right?
Still looking good. Yeah, it might bring about a whole new possibility, right? With having your hands be able to. Anyway, hey man, great to have you on the show. And I'm somebody that appreciates your work. I know police officers unfortunately are painted in a bad light, but I can't even imagine what that would entail. I can't imagine what that would look like. So, at least coming from me, I'll just tell you I appreciate your work.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I think we're all. What I say to people is we're all part of the machine. You know what I mean? Like I'll never say, "Oh, cops are special this," and firefighters are special this. We're all, teachers, nurses, cops, carpenters, and we're all, I say, part of the machine. We're part of what makes America and society great. You know what I mean? So I think we're all worthwhile and valuable people.
I'm at Mark Smelly Bell. Strength is never a weakness. Weakness is never a strength. Catch y'all later.